Chapter 24:12. The Sword Principle Trial in terms of insights enlightenment. Jian Wushuang had received insights of space-time law and transmigration law back at the Narcissus Mansion in Narcissus Island. Those two insights were incomplete and were at a very low level. Despite that, they were a great help to Jian Wushuang to understand the two major laws of time, space, and transmigration. Lying before his eyes now was the swordsmanship skill left by a sword cultivator at the undying saint level. Even though I understand the sword principle, my speed will naturally be slower if I'm blindfolded as I have been exploring it on my own. If I have a complete set of sword principles, I'll know what to explore next and how to explore further. I'll definitely be helpful in improving my swordsmanship faster. The sword principle insights left by this purple blood saint is particularly important to me. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands tightly together. Not only did the purple blood saint leave his sword principle insights, but also created the purple blood swordsmanship. For Jian Wushuang, what attracted him was the insights. Although the purple blood swordsmanship was useful to Jian Wushuang, it was not as useful as the sword principle insights. I guess I'll give it a go. Not sure if I can pass this trial bridge, mumbled Jian Wushuang secretly. The sword principle and purple blood swordsmanship left behind by the purple blood saint were available only after he passed the trial bridge. He would not get either of them if he failed to cross the bridge. On the 8th trial bridge, Jian Wushuang had taken his first step. The moment he took his first step, he saw different sceneries in front of him. It was a dark void. Jian Wushuang stood in the very center of the void, and in front of him was a shadowy figure. Jian Wushuang could not clearly see the hazy figure which was holding a long sword in his hand. He had a pair of weird eyes that were looking straight at Jian Wushuang. This space has 81 floors. You are currently on the first floor. After you defeat me, you will enter the next level and meet a stronger opponent than me. You have 10 days. If you pass all 81 floors within 10 days, you are considered to have passed the test. The hazy figure spoke monotonously, but Jian Wushuang could hear him clearly. Jian Wushuang shook his right hand and noticed that his power had been suppressed to the level of an ordinary third-class divine demon. So, the power remains at the level of an ordinary divine demons and we are competing purely with our swordsmanship? Jian Wushuang raised his brows. The trial bridge reminded him of the sword principle trial tower where he had been in his previous life for thousands of years. The sword principle trial tower was an opportunity given to him by Emperor 13. During the 1,000 years he spent in the sword principle trial tower, he had a new understanding of sword principle, and his swordsmanship cultivation was greatly improved. The trial bridge's test was very different from the sword principle trial tower, but its essence was similar. It was basically a swordsmanship competition with the only difference being his opponent's swordsmanship and sword principles understanding constantly improving with each test level. Only 10 days? I don't have time to waste. Jian Wushuang smiled and immediately started attacking. Buzz. Fuzzy sword light flashed. Jian Wushuang was fighting against the first floor's hazy figure. In just a split second, Jian Wushuang's sword pierced through the hazy figure and passed the first floor. The first floor is easy. Jian Wushuang smiled and went on to the second floor. Soon he passed the second floor, followed by the third and fourth floors. It did not take long for Jian Wushuang to pass the first 10 floors before carrying on. While Jian Wushuang was working through the 8th trial bridge, Su Tong stood with her eyes closed on the 5th trial bridge. They were both in a darkened space, but Su Tong was fighting against 11 people instead of 1. Those 11 people were all black-armored sergeants. All of them were wielding black spears and were extremely skillful. They worked seamlessly with each other, which brought a lot of pressure to Su Tong. Most importantly, the number of sergeants increased as time went by. Su Tong's face remained emotionless as she wielded her spear with both skill and dexterity, silently sweeping across like a phantom. The black-armored sergeants advanced towards her one after another, but she managed to ward them off with her spear and single-handedly fought those 11 black-armored sergeants while remaining on the advantageous side. However, good times did not last long, and in the dark void, 2 black-armored sergeants appeared out of thin air. There were now a total of 13 sergeants against Su Tong. Su Tong's face sank, but she calmly dealt on. She tried her best in the dark space and improved herself in the process of fighting with those black-armored sergeants. Her set of spear skills became more nimble and flexible during combat. No one from the outside knew about the scene. Like other Narcissus Island's disciples, they only saw her standing on the trial bridge, but could not see what she was facing. Right at the deepest part of the tomb, a consciousness hidden in an independent space covered the entire inner area and even the entire saint's tomb. Whether it was the outer area or the inner area of the saint's tomb, everything that happened in every corner was clearly visible to this consciousness. What Su Tong and Jian Wushuang were facing on the trial bridges were clearly seen by the consciousness. At that moment, the consciousness focused all its attention on the fifth trial bridge. This young lady is pretty good. A vague figure was floating in the hidden independent space and muttering to himself. Although at the beginning she didn't have a very good understanding of spear combat skills, after entering the trial bridge and being tested in a battle with the black-armored sergeants, she was able to continuously improve her skills. Her speed of improvement was remarkable. She is now obviously better than when she first entered the trial tower. She is very talented in using a spear. The vague figure was admiring Su Tong. However, he was only admiring her but did not have a high expectation. He knew fully well that even though Su Tong was skillful with the spear, and her comprehension ability was also outstanding, there was still a gap from his expectations. Su Tong might be able to hit the second half of the fifth bridge's tests, but it was not realistic for her to completely pass it. True to his assumptions, as the number of black-armored sergeants increased alongside their more tacit teamwork, Su Tong was placed under a lot of pressure. She was nervous as compared to the calm demeanor that she started with. Su Tong was defeated when the number of black-armored sergeants almost reached 30. Chapter 24:13, Crimson Stone Saint on the fifth trial bridge. Su Tong's eyes were wide open. Did you fail? There was a trace of regret in Su Tong's eyes with a little bit of loss. She was mentally prepared for the outcome and had also gained a lot from the trial bridge's test, which was a good experience. In that hidden independent space. 29 sergeants, it's not bad to be able to get to this point, at least much better than the young men who have arrived in previous sessions. The vague figure slightly sighed and fell silent once again. He made a decision after some time. Although you can get to this point, you are still unable to become my disciple, but I will not let you go empty-handed. The vague figure thought of something and a token was thrown out the very next second. On the fifth trial bridge, Su Tong, who was about to turn around and leave, suddenly stopped as a shot of light was aimed directly towards her from the end of the trial bridge. Su Tong reached out and caught it. It's a token? Su Tong was startled and consciously glanced around with a surprised look on her face. It's spear skills. 2 sets of spear skills. Su Tong was overjoyed. The token she received had 2 sets of spear skills. The 2 sets of skills were the first 2 sets of the strongest spear skills handed down by the Crimson Stone Saint. Su Tong was extremely stoked even when there were only 2 of them. Thank you, Senior. Su Tong bowed at the light source and respectfully gave her gratitude. Su Tong bowed again, seeing that there was no response before suppressing the excitement in her heart, and turned around to leave. In the hidden independent space. These 2 sets of spear skills are simple, but they should be of great use to this young lady. At least before she becomes an ultimate god, both sets of skills will be of great use to her. Even when she becomes an ultimate god in the future, it would still be useful to her for some time. The vague figure smiled faintly. He was the Crimson Stone Saint. Of course, it was just his consciousness. He had been staying in Saint's tomb for so many years. He watched a large number of talented disciples in the Wuxia wilderness enter the tomb and show their strength and talent in front of him. His ultimate goal was to find a suitable successor for himself. Even if the disciples failed his test and were not able to receive his inheritance, he would give away some opportunities to them as long as he appreciated their skills and talents. Just like what he did to Su Tong. Although Su Tong failed the 5th trial bridges test, he still gave Su Tong 2 sets of his spear skills. I hope this young lady can grow up well in the future. The Crimson Stone Saint smiled faintly and his eyes finally moved away from Su Tong. In fact, When Su Tong began her tests on the 5th trial bridge, the consciousness of the Crimson Stone Saint had been paying attention to her and did not care much about the others. It was only after Su Tong left the 5th trial bridge that he started to look around at the others, especially those who were wandering on the 9 trial bridges. What? The Crimson Stone Saint that hid in the independent space was shocked and instantly locked on his consciousness to another trial bridge. That was the 8th trial bridge where Jian Wushuang was. He did not pay the slightest attention to that bridge or Jian Wushuang before, but at that moment he could clearly see what was happening on the 8th trial bridge. 40th floor? This young man who is only a chaotic realm has reached the 40th floor? And that was all in just one day? Though he was the Crimson Red Saint, it still took him by surprise to see Jian Wushuang still standing firmly on the 8th trial bridge. Jian Wushuang was fighting against his 40th opponent within the dark space where the battle was. On the 40th floor, his opponent's swordsmanship had become extremely sharp and intimidating, while his understanding of sword principles was just at the profound sword principle realm. Jian Wushuang remained calm before the formidable opponent. His figure moved quickly along with his long sword which swept, stabbed, or charged forward under his will and command. Each movement was performed effortlessly, yet it was smooth and sleek. He did not use any extraordinary sword skills, nor did he use any of his own great technique inventions like the time-space sword technique and reincarnation sword technique. He had completely suppressed the opponent in front of him with just a couple of arm-swinging movements. Hence, he did not take long to go through the 40th floor. Jian Wushuang entered the 41st floor. He is on the 41st floor and has passed half of the 8 trial bridges tests while still being relaxed and casual. He doesn't even use a lot of sword techniques. If I'm not wrong, he can easily pass through the first 60 floors and may even hit the 70th floor. He really is a genius in swordsmanship. Crimson Stone Saint was amazed. He was just admiring Jian Wushuang's fast progress but had little hope that Jian Wushuang could completely pass the 8th bridges trial. After all, the 8th trial bridges test would only become harder as he progressed further. Furthermore, the 8th trial bridge was also the hardest challenge among all bridges. It was much more difficult compared to the 5th trial bridges test that was accompanied by Crimson Stone Saint's inheritance. A fact the saint himself admitted. The test on the 8th trial bridge was not set by Crimson Stone Saint himself, but by the Purple Blood Saint. Purple Blood Saint was an extremely terrifying, undying saint. He was much stronger than the Crimson Stone Saint at his peak in terms of strength. He was exceptionally strong in sword principles cultivation, and the purple blood sword technique that he had created when he was at his peak was a nightmare to many cultivators when he utilized its full strength. Although the Crimson Stone Saint previously had never fought head-on with Purple Blood Saint in his life, he witnessed the scenes when Purple Blood Saint used his self-invented swords techniques to kill his enemies. Each of his direct sword thrusts sent toward his enemies had instantly killed them, causing 9 powerful saints to be killed in a short time. That terrifying strength sent Crimson Stone Saint in awe. The tests set by such a strong expert was naturally much more demanding than the Crimson Stone Saints. It's a pity that many tests in my old tomb area, including those set personally by the Purple Blood Saint himself, were made for the Divine Demon realm. This young guy is just a chaotic realm. Had he broken through the Divine Demon's realm and got a higher understanding of sword principle, it may be possible for him to completely pass the 8th trial bridge. He could feel his swordsmanship reaching a whole new level that could bring about a huge improvement in terms of strength, power, and accuracy when he wielded the sword. Jian Wushuang stood up after taking a deep breath. The Crimson Stone Saint who was hiding in darkness had also noticed Jian Wushuang's changes. This kid actually broke through? He was taken aback even though he was Crimson Stone Saint himself. He thought that Jian Wushuang had probably gained a deeper understanding of the sword principles and made a small progress, but little did he expect to see Jian Wushuang had broken through to the complete sword principle realm. He had crossed over into the complete sword principle realm from the profound sword principle realm. That was a huge breakthrough. How is this possible? A chaotic realm actually achieved the completed sword principle realm. The Crimson Stone Saint was struck in awe. Sword principles were something enigmatic. Typically, Merits in sword principles were achievable by experts in divine demons realm. A chaotic realm must be a genius to achieve the same level. It was a rare case for divine demons to achieve the profound realm. Many peak divine demon realms struggle to reach that level, let alone a first-class divine demon. As for the complete sword principle realm, only the most outstanding peak divine demons could achieve that level. Under normal circumstances, even ultimate gods who were good with sword techniques could hardly achieve that level. Further beyond the complete sword principle realm was the real sword principle realm, which was only achievable by extremely strong and powerful ultimate gods. Crimson Stone Saint saw a real monster. An incredible sword principle monster. A chaotic realm that achieved the complete sword principle realm. This kid, I thought that he could at least overcome the 60th floor and there was even hope for him to pass the 70th floor, but now that he has achieved the complete sword principle realm, the 70th floor will be easy peasy. He should be able to pass through the 75th floor. I'll depend on his luck if he's able to break through all 81 floors, murmured Crimson Stone Saint. The 8th Trial Bridges tests were designed by the Purple Blood Saint himself and were the most difficult tests in Saint's Tomb. Even though Jian Wushuang was at complete sword principle realm, Crimson Stone Saint still did not think that Jian Wushuang could pass those arduous tests. Jian Wushuang did not waste any more time and faced his 51st opponent. I just made a breakthrough. It's good to have all of you to sharpen my skills. Jian Wushuang grinned as he simply took out his sword. It was not a fancy move, but it was far more precise than before. His opponent on the 51st floor could not handle Jian Wushuang's move at all and was instantly defeated. Jian Wushuang then continued entering the 52nd floor. Jian Wushuang defeated each and every one of his opponents without a bead of sweat. It took only half a day for him to move from the 51st floor to the 70th floor. Chapter 24:15. Trial past Jian Wushuang's speed significantly slowed down upon reaching the 70th floor. Such was quite the norm, as the 81 levels of tests in the trial bridge grew harder as it went along. It's already the 70th floor, but this kid still has no intention of showing his sword skills. Crimson Stone Saint had been watching Jian Wushuang and not really paying attention to the other genius disciples in Saint's Tomb. He could clearly tell that while fighting in the test space against his 70th opponent, Jian Wushuang was just attacking arbitrarily. Even though his moves were all incredibly sophisticated, he never once showed real sword forms or masterstrokes. Even so, the 70th opponent was completely suppressed by him. Still holding back? Crimson Stone Saint frowned. However, even if he is holding back his abilities and not wanting to showcase his sword skills or masterstrokes, he could have easily defeated the 70th opponent with his understanding of the sword. Having said that, he has been staying rather long on the 70th floor. Yes, it was taking a bit too long. It had been a full hour since Jian Wushuang fought against his 70th floor opponent but had not defeated him yet. This kid. No. Crimson Stone Saint's pupils shrunk suddenly. I get it. This kid probably doesn't see the 81 floors as trials. On the contrary, he sees it as his perfect testing ground, using his opponents as practice for his sword skills and improving his understanding of sword principles. It had been such since the very beginning, hence he had been holding back his abilities and fought his opponents with the most simple basic sword skills. Furthermore, he really gained many improvements after practicing in this way. His understanding of sword principles had a direct breakthrough when he passed the 50th floor, achieving complete sword principle realm. At the moment, even though he has achieved complete sword principle realm, he is still practicing his sword skills with those opponents to upgrade himself. He is still improving. Crimson Stone Saint's face was completely stunned. Still improving? Indeed, Jian Wushuang had been constantly improving from the moment he stepped into the test space of the 8th trial bridge and started fighting his first opponent. Even at that very moment, his improvement speed was still rather fast even though he had reached the complete sword principle realm. Crimson Stone Saint could clearly see that the sword skills which Jian Wushuang displayed at the 70th floor were even more sophisticated than right after he had broken through into the complete sword principle realm at the 51st floor. Obviously, his understanding of the sword principles had improved again in such a short time. He just had a major breakthrough in sword principles. How does he continue to improve at such a terrifying speed? Murmured Crimson Stone Saint. He was speechless when it came to evaluating such a sword principles genius. In his opinion, Jian Wushuang's talents in sword skills were truly extremely horrifying. After all, he was an undying saint who had been to many realms during his mortal life and seen many extremely unusual occurrences. However, judging solely based on the sword talent, there was really no one comparable to Jian Wushuang among all the genius experts that he had come across. At the very least, he had never seen another genius swordsman who could directly leap into the complete sword principle realm while only at the chaotic realm. He had not come across anyone who could still and scrupulously improve after having a major breakthrough in sword principles. His improvement in sword principles, using the test space and opponents as practice, was really too fast. At this rate, the current challenge would be. Crimson Stone Saint's heart froze, but right away felt incredibly looking forward to it. Another half-day flew by. Within that half-day, Jian Wushuang had only advanced from the 70th floor to the 75th floor. The progress may be very slow, but his improvements were big. Jian Wushuang could not hold back any longer when reaching the 75th floor. He had to use his sword principles. Space-time sword principle, transmigration sword principle, and Xianluo sword principle were all in full display. Xianluo sword principle was an incredibly perfect and flawless all-rounder sword principle. However, both space-time and transmigration sword principles were his own creation. They were both masterstrokes. It was a mesmerizing sight as he used them. Such an amazing young man, I had still underestimated him. I knew that he had an extremely high understanding of sword principles, but I didn't expect him to possess such terrifying comprehension capabilities as well. Those sword principles that he had created and performed were incomparably sophisticated. One is a perfect fusion with the space-time law, while the other was a flawless combination with the transmigration law. Most importantly, his insights on both space-time and transmigration laws are also immensely profound. As expected, his space-time law was incredibly close to forming a hologram while being also quite well-versed in his transmigration law as well. Was he only in the chaotic realm? Crimson Stone Saint was actually incredibly experienced. He was merely shocked by Jian Wushuang's talents in sword skills before this. However, Jian Wushuang's law insights had also been exposed as soon as he displayed his sword principles. Perhaps nobody could reach his level either. Though, it would be more difficult for him to improve as steadily as before the moment Jian Wushuang revealed his sword principles. After all, he would not be able to hold back anymore once he showed his masterstrokes. The opponent could not ward off his attacks and be immediately defeated. Jian Wushuang eased through the 75th and 76th floors. Although the next 3 floors presented some challenges to him, Jian Wushuang still passed through them. It was not until the 80th floor that he finally encountered an opponent who imposed an immense pressure on him. However, the larger the pressure, the happier Jian Wushuang became. He was entangled in a fierce fight with his 80th floor's opponent. He gave his all and fought for almost an hour. An hour later, he passed the 80th floor. Within that 1 hour, his sword skills had also improved by a lot. That improvement also brought him opportunities to pass both the 80th and final floor. Jian Wushuang unleashed his full potential on the final floor. He slowly gained the upper hand during the fight by utilizing his consistent improvement and finally narrowly defeated his opponent. At that, Jian Wushuang had broken through all 81 floors of tests on the 8th trial bridge. On the trial bridge, Jian Wushuang's senses exited the tests and opened his eyes. I passed. That was pretty difficult, mumbled Jian Wushuang to himself. Previously, as a perfect chaotic creature with a terrifying comprehension ability, he thought that it should not be difficult to pass the sword skills test on the trial bridge. However, the fact remains that he almost did not pass through all the tests. The sword test's difficulties were beyond his expectations. However, he did not know at that moment, Crimson Stone Saint, who was constantly hiding in the dark, was even more stunned. Did I really pass? Chapter 24:16. The Collapse of Trial Bridge. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Nobody knew more than Crimson Stone Saint about how difficult it was to cross the 8th trial bridge. Most importantly, because almost everybody who entered Saint's tomb was second-class and first-class divine demons, the trial was designed based on that divine demon level as a standard. This also meant a mere chaotic realm fighter had passed challenges that were for first and second-class divine demons. Miracle! That was the only word Crimson Stone Saint could use to describe that moment. Too bad this kid is gifted in sword principles instead of spear principles, otherwise, Crimson Stone Saint was obviously feeling envious. He was envious of Purple Blood Saint, who left behind his sword principles insights and sword skills only to be obtained by a real sword genius, even a sword freak. If Purple Blood Saint knew that his sword skills were passed down to an incredible genius, he would probably be smiling in his dreams. As for Crimson Stone Saint himself, he had placed his inheritance inside Saint's tomb as well. However, he could not even find a genius disciple who was barely up to his standards. On the trial bridge, with Jian Wushuang passing the tests, 2 light streams burst out and directly shot at him from the end of the bridge. The 2 light streams were 2 jade slips pieces. One of the jade slips recorded Purple Blood Saint's insights on sword principles. The other had Purple Blood Saint's Purple Blood Sword Principle. Thank you very much. Jian Wushuang took the jade slips and slightly bowed toward the end of the trial bridge before turning around and left. Just as he was leaving the trial bridge, cracks started appearing on the surface of the bridge that connected 2 abysses and started shaking violently. The trial bridge collapsed within only a second. Its countless debris fell into the abyss below and was completely swallowed by the sea of fire. The 8th trial bridge had disappeared. Surrounding the edge of the abyss, other than Jian Wushuang, the rest of the 9 Narcissus Island disciples were gathered there. Almost all 9 of them took their chances on the trial bridge, but none including Zhong Yi could pass the tests. The only person who actually obtained something was Su Tong. For better or worse, she learned 2 spear forms while nobody else gained anything. It's almost been 5 days and Jian Wushuang is still on the trial bridge. Isn't this odd? Asked one of the core disciples. Someone else nodded. It's a little odd as he is on the 8th trial bridge. I know the tests there consist of 81 floors with a gradual increase on each floor's difficulty level. It's probably the hardest challenge of all. Saint's tomb has opened so many times, and so many swordsman geniuses tried crossing that trial bridge, but the best performance so far was a genius swordsman from 8,000 years ago called Lin Mang, who passed the 73rd floor. To be able to pass the 73rd floor is considered marvelous, but still far from passing the entire test. The designated time frame was only 10 days. Now that 5 days have passed and Jian Wushuang still remains in there, I would guess that he has at least passed the 50th floor. Breaking through 50 floors, isn't that quite something? Asked a surprised core disciple. Barely. After all, the challenges get harder with each floor. It's quite feasible in the beginning. If someone could pass 50 floors, he would probably be considered a medium-level genius among all the swordsmen who entered the tomb this time. However, taking into consideration that he is only in the chaotic realm, it's really quite amazing to be able to reach that point. The disciples were just chatting casually. They were not in a hurry, as they had tried out all the tests which they should have tried. All they had to do now was to restore their energy and wait patiently for the arrival of other sects' genius disciples and the final 6 positions to appear. As for how many days Jian Wushuang could remain on the trial bridge, it did not concern them. However, right then, the ground started vibrating. What's going on? The 9 Narcissus Island disciples were immediately alarmed. In only a matter of seconds, they discovered the vibration source. It's there, on the trial bridge. It's the one that Jian Wushuang is on. Exclamations of surprise rose as everybody looked over at the trial bridge which Jian Wushuang was on. However, Jian Wushuang had already left the bridge at that moment. It began to collapse as soon as he stepped off the trial bridge. Within only a few moments, the 8th trial bridge completely vanished from everybody's sight. The 9 Narcissus Island disciples at the edge of the abyss were all dumbfounded by the mere sight of it. It collapsed. The trial bridge has collapsed? Does that mean? They all looked over in disbelief at Jian Wushuang's direction. They knew quite a lot about Saint's tomb, hence they naturally knew what a collapsed trial bridge symbolized. It symbolized that the opportunity presented by the test had already been obtained. The test was gone, thus the bridge collapsed and vanished forever. This proved that somebody had passed the 8th trial bridge's test since it had collapsed. Who would that be? It was surely Jian Wushuang without a doubt, who had remained on the bridge for a total of 5 days. My apologies for making you wait, senior brothers. At that moment, Jian Wushuang was already standing before the 9 disciples. Junior brother Jian Wushuang. Zhongyi looked at Jian Wushuang at a loss and asked with a slight doubt, "You passed the test on the trial bridge?" I had pretty good luck," said a smiling Jian Wushuang. "You really passed it?" Zhongyi felt a little numb on the skull. The core disciples around him were feeling the same way. Nobody could believe it. The 8th trial bridge was such a huge challenge that after so many openings of the saint's tomb, the previous best-performing genius swordsman could only pass the 73rd floor. However, it was passed through by someone merely at the chaotic realm. The most unbelievable part being this someone was only at the chaotic realm and merely a Narcissus Island outer disciple. An outer disciple passed the hardest test, and yet the core disciples, including the one considered strongest among them, other than Su Tong, did not get anything from the trial bridge. If anyone among the core disciples could still barely remain calm, it was probably Xiaoheng. Xiaoheng knew how terrifying Jian Wushuang could be. In contrast to the fact that Jian Wushuang could defeat first-class divine demons when he was only at the middle-stage chaotic realm, him finishing the arduous test with his chaotic realm was much easier for him to accept. Chapter 24:17 Sword Principle Insights. It was a temporary shock and the 9 disciples gradually calmed down. However, the way they looked at Jian Wushuang was filled with envy with a hint of jealousy mixed in it. Yes, it was jealousy. There were 9 trials left in Saint's Tomb and each came with an enormous opportunity. Those opportunities were something strongly desired by everyone, but the opportunity on the 8th trial bridge had been obtained by Jian Wushuang. It's junior brother Wushuang's own ability to live up to the challenges on the 8th trial bridge and receive the opportunity in it. It's useless for us to feel envious. Zhongyi waved his hand and became composed again. However, any of the trial bridge's opportunities could make countless experts drool over it. It makes sense to assume that the opportunity junior brother Wushuang acquired is something many people are dying to have, so we should be extra careful from now on. The core disciples' faces each turned serious upon hearing that. Yes, the sin falls not on the man, but the possession of the Jade One. There were no guarantees that none would come to pursue after such a precious opportunity from the trial bridge out of greed. Fortunately, we arrived early at the inner area. Now that we're here, the only ones around are us from Narcissus Island. So only we who witnessed the trial bridge's collapse and knew that junior brother Wushuang was the one who broke through it. As long as we don't say anything, the genius disciples from other sects wouldn't come to pursue us even if they realized the trial bridge has vanished. True. All the core disciples' eyes lit up. It was only the 10th day since the opening of Saint's Tomb. At the moment, genius disciples from various sects probably just started moving towards the inner area, hence Narcissus Island disciples were the only ones there. What happened a while back was naturally known only by Narcissus Island disciples and no one else. Let's go somewhere else since we have tried out all the trials around and there is nothing in the abyss for us anymore, said Zhong. Narcissus Island disciples immediately left the abyss and stopped at a corner of the inner area. After that, it was uneventful as everyone was going about their own businesses. Jian Wushuang sat down on a rock by himself, turning over his palm and took out a piece of jade slip. The jade slip he took out was the Sword Principle Insights left behind by Purple Blood Saint, which he obtained on the 8th trial bridge. Purple Blood Saint was the peak expert among undying saints. He specialized in sword principles, hence his insights were extremely profound. Jian Wushuang really looked forward to looking at the Sword Principle Insights he had left behind. I hope the insights recorded by Purple Blood Saint don't disappoint. After murmuring to himself, Jian Wushuang started browsing through the jade slip's contents. The sword is the leader of all arms, emperor of all weapons. The sword principles are the principles of offense and slaughter. The sword shatters the void on the other shore and witnesses all dimensions. One word of disagreement, unsheathe and kill. No surrender, no cowardice, no tolerance. The only part that matters is the will to not look back and not hold back. This is the cultivation of the sword. Only a few simple sentences, but it was enough to instantly make Jian Wushuang's blood boil. There was even an obscure sword essence within Jian Wushuang that was beyond his suppression, ready to take flight. Purple Blood Saints saw the sword essence, sword principles, and even sword cultivation. But he went to the extreme because of that. Jian Wushuang told himself. He indeed went to the extreme. However, to be more accurate, sword cultivation itself was an extremist act. One word of disagreement, unsheathe and kill. No surrender, no cowardice, no tolerance. There was only the will of not looking and holding back. That was extreme. However, Jian Wushuang's understanding of sword cultivation was different. A great man to him is able to give and take. When it was time not to look back, he would do exactly that. However, when the time came to take a step back, he must do so as well. Only then could one live longer and walk further in this merciless world. As for Purple Blood Saint, he had seen the sword cultivation's essence and truths, but he also understood the way of the world. That was why he died. Hence, becoming an undying saint was his final destination. However, for Jian Wushuang, who was the second perfect chaotic creature in the world, he had his own mission. In addition, he was the only hope of that sealed-off world, so he absolutely could not die. He had to go further and become stronger. Hence, he could not agree with Purple Blood Saint's sword cultivation way. Of course, that was only his personal understanding and perception. Jian Wushuang had no obligation to take it to heart, as every man has his own path. What interested Jian Wushuang was Purple Blood Saint's understanding of sword principles. He continued reading. Jian Wushuang quickly sunk into it. Although Purple Blood Saint's understanding of sword cultivation was rather extreme, his understanding of sword principles was also terrifyingly profound. He had a very detailed explanation of every sword principle realm, the crucial points of every level, the way to break through them, and etc. Sword principles proceeded from insignificance to introductory, merit, profound achievement, and all the way to completion. After that, it was the real sword principle realm. For real sword principle realm, according to Purple Blood Saint, there were 3 major levels. The first level was Sword World. Sword World required a very high level of understanding of sword principles. With the understanding, one could develop his own sword world, which was to develop a world with one's sword principles. As soon as Sword World was completed, one could utilize it to suppress his opponents. Practitioners who were on the same level, if one party had formed his sword world and the other did not, the suppression from the sword world could cut down their opponent's ability by half. If both parties had comprehended sword principles, the party that did not form his sword world would have almost no chance to fight back. However strong his sword skills were, as soon as the sword world suppression began, any sword skill would almost immediately crumble. Sword World was also the symbol of a sword principle expert. A practitioner who was good at sword principles could only be considered a true sword principle expert after he had developed his own sword world. For example, Jian Wushuang, who had achieved the complete sword principle realm but had not yet developed his sword world, could not be considered a sword principle expert. He could only be considered a pretty good sword cultivator. Sword World. Jian Wushuang squinted. He recalled the fight to eliminate the Blood Emperor in his previous life. He fought side by side with Emperor 13, the most terrifying sword cultivator he had encountered. The Emperor displayed one of the forms from his heaven-shaking sword principle. That sword principle was also considered a sword world. However, Emperor 13 was purely performing the masterstroke form, totally different from the sword principle state that Purple Blood Saint had described in his insights. Chapter 24:18. Purple Blood Sword Principle Sword World was only the first level of the real sword principle realm. The second level was Infinity Sword Tree. According to Purple Blood Saint's dictation, sword principles would reproduce by itself as soon as the development of Sword World started, nurturing the first living being in the Sword World. The Infinity Sword Tree. The Sword Tree would be at the center of the Sword World, which was the core of sword principles. From birth, the Sword Tree would grow larger and stronger following the sword principles' improvement and would eventually have every corner of the Sword World under its shades. Life nurturing? Jian Wushuang was stunned. After that, he read about the third level of the real sword principle realm. The realm's third level was the formation of all things in the Sword World. That which happened after the Sword World had an independent and sturdy Infinity Sword Tree. The sword principles would then continue evolving into all objects in the Sword World. Upon reaching that point, the sword essences could form mountains, oceans, and countless other things. The possibilities were limitless. After browsing through the 3 levels of the real sword principle realm, Jian Wushuang felt a slight shock. Initially developed the Sword World, followed by nurturing the first Infinity Sword Tree in the Sword World, and finally forming everything in the world. A process such as this seems similar to the normal progress of Earth. Jian Wushuang mumbled to himself. The world's evolution also started off with a prototype, then slowly nurturing its first life form and gradually forming the rest of the matter on Earth. Sword principles were essentially the evolution of a world. If I'm right, after the forming of all things there was still more to look forward to. After all, the real world doesn't stop at just forming all things. Jian Wushuang knew very clearly that sword principles were infinitely profound. Although Purple Blood Saint's understanding of sword principles was extremely high, he was only an undying saint after all, who was not able to completely see through it. Therefore, the 3 levels that he stated were only a part of sword principles. However, it was already incredibly profound and mysterious for Jian Wushuang, even if it was only a part. After all, he was still a distance away from reaching the first level of sword principles, which was to develop the Sword World. Although Purple Blood Saint's insights of sword principles were very profound, the fact remains that he was only at the second Infinity Sword Tree level himself, Jian Wushuang exclaimed. Purple Blood Saint's own level of real sword principle realm was also mentioned in his insights. Indeed, he was only at the second Infinity Sword Tree level. Even within Infinity Sword Tree, he had only reached the profound achievement and had yet to enter completion. Even so, he was still a terrifying sword cultivator among the undying saints. According to Purple Blood Saint, there were merely a few undying saints who could achieve the third formation of all things level. If any undying saints reached that stage, he would be dominating above all undying saints. Jian Wushuang continued browsing. In the Sword Principle's insights, other than the explanation of Sword Principle realms, the most important information was Purple Blood Saint's understanding towards every single Sword Principle realm, which included a lot of attention-calling details. For example, the way to resolve cultivation bottlenecks and other difficulties. It was a Sword Principles guidebook. It would help Jian Wushuang avoid straying away from the right path. Jian Wushuang spent half a day reading through the insights before finally putting it away. He gave a light exhale and raised his head with joyfulness shining in his eyes. That truly was the sword cultivation of a saint realm. Even though he did not leave behind much insight on the third formation of all things level, nevertheless he went into extreme details on Sword World and Infinity Sword Tree development. With these insights at hand, it would help me steer clear from a lot of issues when I enter the third Sword Principles level, especially regarding the Sword World. Previously, even if I knew that developing Sword World was the first Sword Principles level, I wouldn't even know how to begin, but I do now. Jian Wushuang smiled. The Sword Principle insights was indeed immensely helpful to him. After carefully reading through it once, Jian Wushuang temporarily kept it in his interspatial ring before taking out another jade slip. That jade slip was certainly the one that had the Purple Blood Sword Principle dictated in it. Purple Blood Sword Principle is the most powerful sword principle Purple Blood Saint created. It's also one of his possessions which allowed him to travel within the ancient god domain. I really want to check out this sword principle and see what is so special about it. Jian Wushuang was similarly looking forward to it, hence he started investigating in detail. Purple Blood Saint had a very extreme understanding of sword cultivation. His Purple Blood Sword Principle was also an incredibly extreme set of sword principles. That sword principle only emphasized on one aspect, which was speed. Absolute speed. Purple Blood Sword Principle had a total of 21 sword forms which were all very lively forms. Rapid and yet unpredictable. What really shocked Jian Wushuang was that none of those forms involved highly offensive moves such as furious chops or straight cuts. It's a sword principle that purely brings speed to an extreme level. This Purple Blood Saint, Jian Wushuang, was in awe. After that, he began to study the many sword forms in Purple Blood Sword Principle. 21 sword forms. The first form, Falling Snow. The second form, Demon Shadow. The third form, Purple Light Phantom. The fourth form, Blood Demon. Every sword form had a strong emphasis on speed. Coincidentally, Jian Wushuang had already achieved full comprehension of space-time laws, making him extremely good at speed. At that point, Purple Blood Sword Principle worked as a very good reference for him. Through studying it and in addition to his immense sword principles understanding improvement, he could now absolutely invent his second form of the time-space sword principle. Jian Wushuang crossed-legged and sat there, completely sinking in his studying of the Purple Blood Sword Principle. Time quickly flew by. While Jian Wushuang was deep into his studies of the Purple Blood Sword Principle, the genius disciples from various sects who were still in the outer area of Saint's tomb gradually arrived at the inner area. They reached the trial abysses, where those 9 opportunities were at. However, upon arrival, they immediately noticed one of the missing trial bridges. What happened? Didn't Saint's tomb have 9 opportunities? Since it's so, there should have been 9 trial bridges. Why are there only 8 of them? There were surely 9 opportunities. Clearly, the reason one of them is missing was that someone had passed through it. It was barely more than 10 days after Saint's tomb was opened. Genius disciples from different sects should have only arrived at the inner area not long ago. Who was so fast to pass through a trial? Go check which trial bridge is missing. The genius disciples from different sects started investigating. They soon realized that the missing trial bridge was the 8th trial bridge, which was the bridge where Purple Blood Saint left his sword principle insights and Purple Blood Sword Principle behind. Chapter 24:19. Dissatisfied, the 8th trial bridge that required passing a total of 81 test floors was broken through by someone. The sword principle's insights and Purple Blood Sword Principle left behind by Purple Blood Saint had been obtained. In Saint's tomb, the news took the genius disciples from various sects by storm. One had to realize that there were only 16 levels of trials in Saint's tomb in the beginning, and it got harder by the level. Ever since the discovery of Saint's tomb, it had opened many times and only 7 trials had been broken through. Every time a trial was broken through in the abyss, it would cause a stir. The current situation was not an exception either. Furthermore, it was the 8th trial bridge that was broken through. Everyone knew that among the various trials in Saint's tomb, the 8th trial bridge was definitely one of the hardest to be broken through. Among the 81 test floors, the best result previously set by a person was breaking through 73 floors. It was because of that, people were more shocked when the news had gotten out. At the same time, they were all curious. Who could that be? Who broke through the 8th trial bridge? No idea. The 8th trial bridge had already disappeared when we came. Saint's tomb has barely been opened for more than 10 days. Isn't this person a bit too fast? Really, who is it? All the genius disciples wanted to know who had passed the trial, but nobody had a clue. After all, only Narcissus Island disciples knew about Jian Wushuang breaking through the 8th trial bridge. As long as they kept quiet, it would be difficult for others to find out. However, there were people who tried to find out the person who passed the trial despite the difficulty by using all kinds of methods. Most of those people were swordsmanship geniuses. The sword had always been one of the most commonly seen weapons in the world. Those who entered Saint's tomb were genius disciples from different sects, and quite a lot of them had swords as their main weapon. Most of those genius disciples had all previously received information that among the opportunities offered in Saint's tomb, one of them was dedicated to sword principles. Many people were after the sword principle trial and looking forward to trying it out. However, somebody had already obtained the sword principle opportunity way ahead of them when they had just stepped into the inner area, causing them not to have the chance to try out the 8th trial bridge. How were they willing to accept such a fact? They naturally wanted to expose the person who had taken the opportunity. Among those people, the most fanatical one was Pang Tao. Pang Tao was the 6th 12 minor kings, hailing from the Great Compassion sect. The 12 minor kings were widely recognized as the top 12 geniuses in Wuxia wilderness. The fact that Pang Tao could be named 6th among them showed his exceptional qualities. Other than that, Pang Tao was a sword cultivator. None of those from the 12 minor kings above his ranking were good at sword principles. This also meant that he could be considered the #1 sword cultivator among the younger generation in Wuxia wilderness. He should have been the most hopeful candidate to break through the 8th trial bridge since he was the #1 sword cultivator among the many younger generation genius disciples who had entered Saint's tomb. Pang Tao himself also entered the tomb due to the 8th trial bridge. He had set himself on obtaining Purple Blood Saints cultivation insights and Purple Blood sword principle. However, Pang Tao's face flushed up with blood while standing on the edge of the trial abyss and looking at where the 8th trial bridge should have been. His eyes were terrifyingly grim. He was truly furious at that moment. How he had longed for the opportunity that came with the 8th trial bridge. However, at the same time, he understood perfectly how difficult it was to break through the trial on the 8th trial bridge. No sword geniuses had ever broken through the trial before. Not even he felt absolutely confident about it, let alone the others. Hence, he was not hasty about it. Like the other disciples, he stayed in the outer area for 10 days and collected some purple tokens before rushing into the inner area. He thought that, since the trial bridge was there, the sword principle insights and the purple blood sword principle left behind by Purple Blood Saint would be there waiting patiently for him to take up the trial as well. He was not in the slightest hurry. However, he did not expect that the bridge had already been broken through when he arrived. He, the #1 young sword cultivator, had not taken up the trial, but the trial bridge was already gone. He could not accept it. Pang Tao felt incredibly unwilling to accept it. All the unwillingness had turned into a surging wave of anger. Investigate it. Pang Tao growled like a furious beast. There was another core disciple from the Great Compassion sect whose heart skipped a bear when he saw Pang Tao's expression and immediately went to investigate. I truly want to see who has such skills to break through the test on the 8th trial bridge in such a short time. Pang Tao clenched his fist tight. His nails sunk into his flesh, causing some blood to stream out. Those who simultaneously went to investigate included quite a number of geniuses who were gifted in swordsmanship. However, nobody saw what happened at the trial bridge with their own eyes, and since there were many genius disciples who entered the tomb, to find such a genius disciple who was gifted in swordsmanship and had broken through the trial was not easy. 3 days swiftly passed. Most people gave up after not finding a clue within the past 3 days. Only Pang Tao was still feeling extremely dissatisfied. So, any result? Pang Tao was staring at the Great Compassion sect core disciple in front of him with his bloodshot eyes. The core disciple took a deep breath and solemnly said, "Senior brother Pang Tao, I have tried every investigation method, but I still couldn't discover who had broken through the test on the 8th trial bridge. I have also checked out the sword geniuses who had exceptional swordsmanship and would be able to pass the trial, but still couldn't find any leads. Which means that person who passed the trial isn't someone we are aware of. It's probably someone insignificant and has no fame?" Pang Tao frowned. "Exactly, which made our investigation even harder," said the core disciple. "The 8th trial bridge is so hard to pass. Even a genius who could defy the heavens would have to take quite a few days to break through. We were among the ones who arrived here quite early, and yet when we got here, the 8th trial bridge had already disappeared. That means the person who had broken through the trial got to the inner area even earlier," said Pang Tao softly. "Start by investigating the order of people's arrival. Find out which sect arrived at the inner area first, or rather, who arrived at the inner area first. Let's figure out which sects that came here the earliest, Then we can begin filtering from there on. Chapter 2420. Found him. The core disciple quickly went back to his investigation. Investigating the few sects that arrived first at the inner area was so much easier than simply investigating who passed the trial. The core disciple once again appeared in front of Pang Tao after only half a day. The core disciple said, "Senior brother Pang Tao, I have the results. Among the numerous sects from Wuxia Wilderness, 3 sects that first arrived at the inner area were Demonic Moon Sect, Heavenly Feather Sect, and Narcissus Island. They were the ones who arrived at the earliest. As for who among them arrived first, it's undetermined." "Just these 3? Pang Tao squinted. Of these 3, Heavenly Feather Sect could be immediately ruled out. After all, they are a weak sect and there are only 3 disciples listed to enter Saint's tomb. I received accurate intelligence that none of their 3 disciples are gifted in swordsmanship," said the core disciple. "Aha." Pang Tao nodded slightly. The 8th trial bridge was a test specifically designed for swordsmanship. If they did not even have a disciple who was good at it, Heavenly Feather Sect would naturally not have anyone who could pass the trial. But the Demonic Moon Sect is a big sect. There are 8 disciples who came into Saint's tomb. Moreover, there are 2 among the 8 of them who are good at swords. I have information about these 2 people as well. One of them is the Demonic Moon Sect's number 1 genius, Yao Xian. As for the second one, he is only a normal talented disciple. Although he is a second-class divine demon, his sword principle understanding is rather low. I heard he is only at merit in sword principles, and his sword skills are also quite mediocre. Probably not the person who could pass the test at the 8th trial bridge," said the core disciple. Merit in sword principles? Of course, he can't pass. Even Yao Huan, who is the number 1 genius of the Demonic Moon Sect, can't pass the trial. Let alone him. Pang Tao sneered in disdain. He knew about Yao Huan and they even crossed hands before. At that time, he was fighting against Yao Huan, who was collaborating with 2 other first-class divine demons. Even when fighting 3 of them altogether, Pang Tao still crushed them. In terms of swordsmanship, Yao Huan could only be considered as good. However, it would be a fantasy if he wanted to break through the sword principles trial on the 8th trial bridge. Narcissus Island is the only one left since we have ruled out those 2 sections. Narcissus Island is qualified to be one of the top 10 grand sects in Wuxia Wilderness. Is there anyone who is good at swords and has a really high comprehensive ability towards sword principles among their disciples? Pang Tao asked. However, the core disciple frowned upon that question. Senior brother Pang Tao, according to my intelligence, Yao Huan from Demonic Moon Sect is the only one possible to pass the trial bridges challenge among all 3 sections. There shouldn't be anyone else. As for Narcissus Island, they have 10 disciples who entered Saint's tomb like before, but there's only one who is good at swords and most importantly, that person is merely in the chaotic realm. Pang Tao was slightly surprised. Chaotic realm? You're saying that among the 10 Narcissus Island disciples, there is a person in the chaotic realm who is good at swords? Correct. But it's impossible for a person in chaotic realm to break through the challenge on the 8th trial bridge, said the core disciple. Impossible? How do you know it's impossible? Do you know his level of understanding of sword principles? Pang Tao looked over. Oh, I actually don't know, but his realm. Before he could finish, Pang Tao cut him off and said, being in his current cultivation does mean that his abilities are weak. However, the tests in the trial abyss do not emphasize on your cultivation level. Pang Tao paused when he reached that part of the sentence, his eyes glowing with an odd expression. Chaotic realm. A chaotic realm person from Narcissus Island. Wouldn't he be? Pang Tao's face changed as he suddenly recalled someone. Do you have any information about that chaotic realm guy? For example, his real name or his status on Narcissus Island? Asked Pang Tao immediately. That isn't clear for now, but I can go ask, said the core disciple. Go ask immediately. Pang Tao pushed him. The core disciple held a token in his hand and immediately sent a message to the Great Compassion Sect's intelligence department outside. The Great Compassion Sect was the top sect in Wuxia Wilderness. Having a foundation generations old, Their intelligence-gathering ability was also the strongest in Wuxia Wilderness. They had been keeping a close eye on grand sects like Narcissus Island, sects that are qualified to be in the top 10 list. If an incredible genius came out of Narcissus Island, the Great Compassion sect would know everything about him. They even have detailed information about each core disciple from Narcissus Island. Though, the Great Compassion sect did not show much interest toward the outer disciples. However, due to Elder Wujian, Jian Wushuang was a rather special Narcissus Island outer disciple, hence the Great Compassion sect had taken note of him. Besides, there were already instructions from the superiors in the Great Compassion sect early on to keep a close eye on him. Hence, they found his information with just a slight search. The core disciple looked over at Pang Tao. "Senior brother Pang Tao, I've found him. The Chaotic Realm disciple from Narcissus Island who entered Saint's tomb this time is called Jian Wushuang. According to what we know, he is only an outer disciple. There is an elder on Narcissus Island who looks highly upon him. It's due to this elder that he could enter the tomb." Jian Wushuang, Jian Wushuang? Pang Tao recited his name repeatedly. The glow in his eyes became extremely sharp. Indeed, it's him. It's this Jian Wushuang. "Senior brother Pang Tao, you're saying that the guy who passed the 8th trial bridge is this Jian Wushuang? How is that possible?" The core disciple was in slight disbelief. A mere Chaotic Realm disciple who was only an outer disciple. An absolutely insignificant person, and he passed the challenge that countless swordsmanship geniuses failed to break through? I can't guarantee if it's some other people. But if it's him, I can be sure that he is the one who passed the challenge on the 8th trial bridge. After all, this Jian Wushuang had almost become my master's second personal disciple, said Pang Tao coldly. The core disciple was completely dumbfounded upon hearing that. Did Pang Tao just mention his master? Who was his master? He was one of the grand elders of the Great Compassion sect, and the widely renowned #1 sword cultivator in Wuxia Wilderness at the same time, Fan Jianxian. That Jian Wushuang almost became Fan Jiangxian's personal disciple? How was that possible? Besides, if he was that capable, why was he only an outer disciple on Narcissus Island? Regardless of how doubtful the core disciple was, Pang Tao had decided it was him. "Jian Wushuang, I've heard so much about you from Master early on. I didn't expect you to show up in Saint's tomb and pass the challenge on the 8th trial bridge," murmured Pang Tao with his eyes glowing frostily. Chapter 24-21. Pang Tao's visit. "Where is Jian Wushuang?" asked Pang Tao. "He has always stayed with Narcissus Island disciples and they are inside," said the core disciple. "Very well. Take me to him," said Pang Tao coldly. "Brother Pang Tao, do you want to meet and greet the other 2 seniors first?" asked the core disciple curiously. The Great Compassion sect was the top sect. They sent 30 disciples into the saint's tomb, which were divided into 3 teams. Pang Tao led a team, and the other 2 teams were also led by 2 other members of the 12 minor kings. There were only 10 people in a single team, which was similar to the team from Narcissus Island. "It's just a small matter, let's not bother them both. Come on." Pang Tao waved his hand. Pang Tao and the 9 Great Compassion sect disciples in his team immediately set out towards Jian Wushuang. At that very moment, the inner area was crowded with talented disciples from various sects who gathered there. Most of the disciples were at the abyss of trial, attempting to cross those trial bridges. Although there were only 8 trial bridges left, each trial bridge could house multiple people at the same time. Therefore, those disciples did not need to queue up. Many disciples who turned up earlier had already tried those trial bridges one after another, but none were successful. Those sect disciples who have been tested did not loiter around the abyss of trials. Instead, they were scattered at every corner of the inner area. The 10 disciples from Narcissus Island were also gathered somewhere in a corner. Jian Wushuang was still studying alone the purple blood sword principle, while the other 9 disciples gathered in small groups and chatted casually. Junior Wushuang is neither conceited nor rash. Many genius disciples that are good at swordsmanship are looking for him, but he was not worried at all. He just sits there studying all by himself. What is there to worry about? No one but us knows that he passed the 8 trial bridges test. As long as we don't let our tongues slip, no one will come after him. To be honest, I've never thought so highly of junior brother Wushuang before. It seems that although he has a lower realm, he is talented. That's for sure. How can he be just an ordinary person if he could pass the 8th trial bridge which so many sword principle geniuses failed? Those Narcissus Island core disciples had a huge change of attitude towards Jian Wushuang during the conversation. Even though Jian Wushuang had never shown them his real strength and powers, he had won their respect by passing through the 8th trial bridges test. Those core disciples were not stupid either. They knew that luck alone would not bring Jian Wushuang his success but rather his outstanding sword skills. Furthermore, even if Jian Wushuang overcame the trials by luck, he bagged the opportunities that came with it. After his return to Narcissus Island, the higher-ups of Narcissus Island would notice his potential and make him one of the core disciples. All core disciples, and they were of equal status, no one would be looking down on each other. Zhong Yi, Su Tong, and Wei Qing stood together in a clearing. "Junior brother Wei Qing, how is your injury recovering?" asked Zhong Yi. "Not bad. Although there's still a long way to return to my peak, I can handle a fight," answered Wei Qing. Zhong Yi smiled. "That's good. Now that there is no need to collect purple amulets and each of us has also attempted the trial bridges tests, we will just wait patiently for Feng Tian Scroll's 6 observation seats to appear one by one. We shall try our best to fight for a seat if there's a chance." Su Tong and Wei Qing both nodded their heads. Neither the purple amulets which allowed its owners to enter the divine power ocean nor the opportunities that came along with the tests appeared as the most tempting opportunity of Saint's Tomb. After all, the most fascinating thing was the 6 seats to observe Feng Tian Scroll and be enlightened in the process. That was the greatest opportunity. The tomb was opened so many times, and every time the 6 seats appeared, a bloody storm was to be expected. Talented disciples who finally got those 6 seats saw a great improvement in their strength after they got a look at the Feng Tian Scroll. Progress in power and cultivation were what all disciples were after. Among the trio of Zhong Yi, Su Tong, and Wei Qing was a second-class divine demon who knew very well that he was unable to contest for a seat. On the other hand, Zhong Yi and Su Tong were both extremely powerful first-class divine demons and had a strong desire for those 6 seats. "By the way, senior brother Zhong Yi, shall we send a message to the elders that junior brother Wushuang had passed the 8th trial bridge?" asked Su Tong suddenly. "Shall we tell the elders?" Zhong Yi pondered for a moment and then shook his head. "No, we are not in a hurry to do that. Anyway, we are all safe now. There is no need to report this to the elders. Let's wait till we return safely to Narcissus Island before bringing that up." "Well, I think so too." Su Tong also nodded. But at that moment, swoosh, 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 in the void some distance away, a total of 10 black spots zoomed in at an astonishing speed. Those 10 black shadows were not only fast but also amazingly powerful. Their presence stirred up a commotion. Many sect disciples were startled along the way. "They are from the Great Compassion sect?" "Yes, they are from the Great Compassion sect. Their leader is Pang Tao, who is ranked 6th among the 12 minor kings. Pang Tao looks aggressive. I wonder who has offended him? Who knows? Pang Tao is the top sword cultivator among the younger generation in the Wuxia wilderness. His master, Fan Zhenxian, was even more famous. He went into the tomb aiming for the 8th trial bridges test, but the bridge was crossed and as a result, its opportunity was claimed. He was annoyed when he found out about it. Had he managed to find the person who crossed the 8th trial bridge? Let's go along and have a look. Many sect disciples arrived with Pang Tao and his team members. In the blink of an eye, Pang Tao and his team members appeared in front of Narcissus Island disciples. The 10 disciples of Narcissus Island stood up one after another and looked over at Pang Tao and his members. The only exception was Jian Wushuang, who was still quietly studying. Zhong Yi's and Su Tong's expressions sank as they looked at those incoming people. "Pang Tao and everyone from the Great Compassion sect, what brought you here?" Zhong Yi stepped forward and asked. As the top genius of Narcissus Island, although he could not match Pang Tao, he should at least remain calm before Pang Tao. On the contrary, The other disciples of Narcissus Island were in awe when facing Pang Tao. Chapter 24-22. Extremely sure one's reputation grows correlatively to the shadow of the tree. One, the name of the 12 minor kings was incomparable to ordinary geniuses. Are you Zhongyi? Pang Tao glanced at Zhongyi. I've heard about you. Among the younger disciples of Wuxia Wilderness, apart from the 12 minor kings, there are also a few more capable cultivators. You are one of them, but it's a pity that I am not here to see you today. In that case, who are you looking for? Zhongyi stared at Pang Tao alertly. Pang Tao grinned evilly as his eyes swept across the other Narcissus Island disciples, observing them one at a time. All the disciples who met his gaze lowered their heads and no one dared to look directly at Pang Tao. These Narcissus Island core disciples were self-acclaimed geniuses. They were indeed talented to a certain extent. However, many geniuses had gathered in the saint's tomb. Their powers were a far cry compared to Pang Tao from the Great Compassion sect, who ranked 6th among the 12 minor kings. Pang Tao could not be bothered about those disciples either. He looked around and finally locked his eyes on Jian Wushuang, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. He is the one I'm looking for. Pang Tao pointed directly at Jian Wushuang. His gaze became extremely sharp, and his aura completely enshrouded Jian Wushuang. The Narcissus Island disciples, including Zhongyi, were startled to see Pang Tao pointing towards Jian Wushuang. Has Pang Tao already known that junior brother Wushuang broke through the 8th trial bridge? That cannot be. We didn't spread the news and no one saw junior brother Wushuang completed the test besides us. How did he find out? Zhongyi frowned. At that moment, Jian Wushuang, who was enveloped in Pang Tao's aura, recovered his attention. He opened his eyes and slowly stood up. Under the overbearing aura pressure of Pang Tao's first-class divine demon, Jian Wushuang remained calm and expressionless. He turned his head to look at Pang Tao and smiled faintly. You must be a friend from the Great Compassion sect, brother Pang Tao, who is ranked 6th among the 12 minor kings, right? I wonder why you are looking for me? Jian Wushuang sounded polite. He even addressed Pang Tao humbly as a senior brother, though they were from different sections. Senior brother? You really know how to cotton up to me. You must be Jian Wushuang. I know you. Pang Tao stared at Jian Wushuang. It's an honor to be known by senior brother Pang Tao. Jian Wushuang was still acting humbly. Jian Wushuang, I won't waste time talking nonsense with you. I know that you are the one who passed the test of the 8th trial bridge. The Purple Blood Saint's inheritance is now in your hands. I will leave now as long as you hand over the Purple Blood Saint's inheritance to me. Otherwise, Pang Tao's voice was cold. His words immediately sent the surrounding void into chaos. There were quite a number of talented disciples from various sects surrounding him. Previously, those disciples had no idea what Pang Tao wanted to do with Jian Wushuang, but they now realized his intention. Pang Tao was there for the Purple Blood Saint's inheritance. They were puzzled as Jian Wushuang did not look like someone who was able to complete the test on the 8th trial bridge. If I'm not mistaken, isn't Jian Wushuang just a chaotic realm? Yes, he is a chaotic realm. I noticed him when I was in the outer areas of Saint's tomb. The weakest genius of all the sects this time who entered the tomb was at least a second-class divine demon. He is the only one in the chaotic realm. Did Pang Tao just say that this chaotic realm passed the test of the 8th trial bridge? Are you kidding me? I don't think it is possible. He is just a chaotic realm anyway. Even if he is highly talented, he could not possibly have a good sword principles understanding. How could he possibly pass the trial bridge which countless sword skill geniuses failed to pass? Moreover, I've never heard of Jian Wushuang. I would never believe that an unknown chaotic realm had just passed the test. Everyone around was busy gossiping about what they saw. It turned out that 99% or perhaps 100% of them did not believe that Jian Wushuang passed the test. Some people even thought that Pang Tao was probably looking for trouble with Narcissus Island, so he deliberately made the claim. Unlike the genius disciples of various sects, Narcissus Island core disciples trembled when they heard what Pang Tao said. They did not expect that Pang Tao would turn up and insist that Jian Wushuang was the person who had crossed the 8th trial bridge despite no one spreading the news. Where did he get the news? Why was he so sure? Pang Tao, what are you talking about? Which trial bridge's test? Did you say that the test of the 8th trial bridge that has stumped countless sword skill geniuses in Wuxia Wilderness was passed by junior brother Wushuang? Zhong Yi was calm and even sarcastically smiled. The test of the 8th trial bridge is extremely tough. My junior brother Wushuang is indeed gifted with the sword, but he is only a chaotic realm. I might as well tell you that he is just an outer disciple of Narcissus Island. He is particularly close to Elder Wujian, hence Elder Wujian sent him along with us to this tomb so that he can gain knowledge. Isn't it funny if you claim that he is the one who passed the test of the 8th trial bridge? Ha, Pang Tao. What wild assumptions you have. Zhong Yi did not hide his sneer. The genius disciples of various sects around gave Pang Tao the derisive look. Obviously, no one believed Pang Tao's claim. It was unreasonable for a chaotic realm and a Narcissus Island outer disciple to have passed the challenging test. Jian Wushuang made his way to Zhong Yi's side, but he remained expressionless. Pang Tao stared down at Jian Wushuang and suddenly grinned. Huh, did I really just make a wild guess? Or is it true? Jian Wushuang, don't think that you can hide away just because you are only a chaotic realm and an outer disciple of Narcissus Island. Indeed, no one from the other sects will ever doubt that it was you. That's why no one was able to hunt you down after so many days. But I'm different. Jian Wushuang, I've heard of you a long time ago. I know who you are. Don't forget that I'm not merely the Great Compassion Sect core disciple. Most importantly, I have a master, and he's the top sword cultivator of the Wuxia Wilderness, Fan Jianxian. Jian Wushuang's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He was helpless. He finally knew why Pang Tao was extremely sure that he was the one who passed the test. Chapter 24-23, Everything about Jian Wushuang, 1. The others were even more confused than before, but Jian Wushuang could understand the implicit meaning Pang Tao was putting across. The genius disciples of various sects present at the scene wore strange expressions. They did not know why Pang Tao made the comment or even mentioned his master, Fan Jianxian. Pang Tao, what exactly do you want to say? Zhong Yi squinted his eyes slightly and stared at Pang Tao. Haha, could it be that you, the top genius of Narcissus Island and senior brother to Jian Wushuang, knew nothing about your junior brother? Pang Tao sneered. He then waved to someone by his side. A core disciple of the Great Compassion Sect immediately stepped forward and handed him a jade slip. Pang Tao took the jade slip and gave Jian Wushuang a deep stare before reading out loudly. Jian Wushuang, born 21 years ago in Blazing Moon City, Anzhou Commandery. A divine sword came falling from the sky when he was born. A mysterious expert in Anzhou Commandery, Taoist Xian Shen named him Jian Wushuang, which means a man with indomitable sword skills. Many of the talented disciples present were shocked to hear the very first statement. Did he say 21 years ago? Jian Wushuang was born 21 years ago? So he's only 21 years old this year? But his cultivation level. He is at the peak of the chaotic realm. A 21-year-old peak chaotic realm? Oh dear, that sounds impossible, right? How can he progress with such cultivation speed? Exclaimed someone. It was daunting to hear about a 21-year-old who had achieved peak chaotic realm. No one had ever taken Jian Wushuang seriously before that. It was mainly because of his low cultivation level. He had not even made it into the divine demon realm. However, they had completely changed their minds after hearing about his age. Jian Wushuang was too young. Those divine demon realm disciples, especially those who were geniuses, had spent almost 100 years or even hundreds of years to get to where they were. Yet, Jian Wushuang had achieved peak chaotic realm at the tender age of 21. It would not be long before he caught up with them. As for the divine sword which Pang Tao mentioned to have descended from the sky and inspired Jian Wushuang's name sounded improbable, so no one gave it much attention. Pang Tao momentarily paused before continuing to recite the information about Jian Wushuang from the jade slip. Jian Wushuang, you were unknown from the age of 1 to 16 and did not show much of a skill until you were 16. When you were only 16, you claimed an instant victory after shattering the weapon of Zhuge Hong, a core disciple from Left Heaven sect, with just one strike of your sword. At that time, your cultivation level was only at pure yang realm, but your sword principle understanding had achieved profound sword principle realm. What? It's impossible. The genius disciples around were shocked. How could he have achieved profound sword principle realm at the age of 16? That must have been a joke. There were many second-class divine demons, and even some first-class divine demons who spent years in sword skill cultivation, yet they were nowhere near the profound sword principle realm. A 16-year-old young man in pure yang realm could not have made such progress even if he had started cultivation when he was in his mother's womb. Pang Tao ignored the reactions of those people around him and continued to read from the jade slip. At the age of 19, something happened at the Lin mansion. You helped the Lin family because of your father. At that time, you just stepped into the chaotic realm. Despite that, you had relentlessly killed 2 third-class divine demons in the war and resolved the Lin family's crisis in one fell swoop. Those genius disciples around were flabbergasted. There was no way what Pang Tao said was true. He killed 2 third-class divine demons at the early stage of the chaotic realm? How could that be? It was already inconceivable that someone could kill a third-class divine demon at the peak of the chaotic realm. Many of them shook their heads in denial after hearing what Pang Tao said. Not true. That can't be right. I don't know where Pang Tao got that information, but it sounds bizarre. Everyone was doubtful about the information Pang Tao had produced. Pang Tao continued. Only 3 months after you resolved the crisis for the Lin family, 2 great second-class divine demons of Gold Cauldron sect, Xiang Yi and Chen Yuan, and 4 third-class divine demons seek you out to avenge for an elder of the Xiang clan who died. You sweep all of them out in the battle again and behead 3 Gold Cauldron sect's third-class divine demons. You even defeated both Xiang Yi and Chen Yuan, who were second-class divine demons. Everyone shook their heads. They were certain that the information was misleading. If there was a slim chance for Jian Wushuang to have killed third-class divine demons in the early stages of the chaotic realm, it was downright impossible for him to have defeated second-class divine demons. After reading the statements, Pang Tao finally lowered the jade slip in his hand. He looked quizzically at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, I found this information about you from the Great Compassion sect. I must say it sounds pretty interesting. It's indeed rather interesting. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly, but he kept his straight face. To be honest, I was shocked when I first saw this information. Many statements sounded unbelievable to me. Although this information came from the Great Compassion sect's intelligence network, I have my doubts about it. Let's just verify its authenticity since I met you here, said Pang Tao. How would you like to verify it? Jian Wushuang asked. It's very simple. A few disciples from Gold Cauldron sect have entered the tomb. Chen Yuan, who has fought with you, is one of them. He is just somewhere around the corner. Let's get him to testify about it. Pang Tao shot his eyes to his side while he was making the suggestion. Many disciples also looked in the same direction. That was where the Gold Cauldron sect disciples gathered. A total of 6 disciples from the Gold Cauldron sect came, and Chen Yuan was one of the 6 disciples. Chen Yuan clearly heard what Pang Tao said earlier, but he said nothing. Under everyone's scrutiny, Chen Yuan stood up and solemnly said, I don't like to admit it, but what Pang Tao said just now is indeed true. Back then when we were in front of Lin Mansion in Anjiu Commandery, Jian Wushuang was at the early stage of the chaotic realm. However, he had the powers of a second-class divine demon. Junior brother Xiang Yi and I joined forces in the battle, and although we were not defeated, junior brother Xiang Yi and I were at a disadvantage. Chen Yuan made a public acknowledgement. The many talented disciples who determined that the information was false were all taken aback. So, it's true. Jian Wushuang has subdued second-class divine demons in his early stage of chaotic realm. How is that possible? Pang Tao received that information from the Great Compassion sect, and their intelligence network rarely made a mistake. Nonetheless, that was some shocking truth. Chapter 24-24. Everything about Jian Wushuang. 2. Shocking. Yes, it indeed shocked the world. It was Jian Wushuang's formidable record that took the world by surprise. It was simply unbelievable. It sounded so blatantly implausible that everyone thought the information was embellished. However, that information was a fact. Monster! Countless people turned their heads to look at Jian Wushuang. Even several other Narcissus Island disciples, including Zhong Yi and Su Tong, stared at Jian Wushuang in stupefaction. They knew that Jian Wushuang must be gifted in sword principle to be able to pass the 8th Trial Bridges test, but they had never thought that he would have such an incredible past before entering Narcissus Island. Profound sword principle realm at 16 years old. He suppressed 2 great second-class divine demons and slew third-class divine demons at merely 19 years old. How could a monster such as this appeared in the Wuxia wilderness? What blew their minds was that such a monster was their junior brother who was only an outer disciple in Narcissus Island. If such a monster was only an outer disciple, what more could core disciples like them boast? It seems like this information is true. Pang Tao could not help but glance at Jian Wushuang with a strange luster gleaming in his eyes. He had to admit that Jian Wushuang's record was invincible. His name being called Jian Wushuang was not in vain one. His sword skills were indeed peerless. Jian Wushuang, according to the information collected by Great Compassion Sect, both Elder Wujian of Narcissus Island and Baiyu from Anjiu Commandery County had reached out to you after the battle. Pang Tao continued saying, well, Narcissus Island must have given you the best offer to join them. Baiyu had contacted the Great Compassion Sect on your behalf, and you were also offered to join the Great Compassion Sect as a core disciple. Baiyu had also spoken to my master about your talent in sword skills, and my master intended to recruit you as his personal disciple, but you turned him down. You refused Baiyu's invitation, refused to join the Great Compassion Sect, and refused the opportunity to become my master's personal disciple. Instead, you accepted the invitation from Narcissus Island. What's even funnier is that you chose only to be an outer disciple in Narcissus Island. Jian Wushuang, I really don't know what you were thinking? Pang Tao did not hide his mockery tone. His statements had once again sent the crowd into tumult. He refused the invitation to join the Great Compassion Sect and the opportunity to become a personal disciple of Fan Jianxian? It was inconceivable. The Great Compassion Sect was recognized as the top sect in Wuxia Wilderness. Not only was the Great Compassion Sect the strongest in both powers and foundations, but they also had the most and best talented disciples. The 12 minor kings were a proven fact of their success. The Great Compassion Sect took up 4 out of 12 seats of the 12 minor kings. They were the young blood of Wuxia Wilderness. Many geniuses desired to be part of the Great Compassion Sect. Many young cultivators were eager to join the Great Compassion Sect, but they were not given the opportunity. Fan Jianxian, one of the 3 great grand elders of the Great Compassion Sect, and an ultimate God Realm super expert were recognized as the top sword cultivator in Wuxia Wilderness. If one could be his personal disciple, it was tantamount to reaching the sky in a single bound. If one could be the personal disciple of a super expert like Fan Jianxian with both parties willing to religiously teach and learn, it was almost guaranteed that even a slightly talented person would become one of the 12 minor kings in the future. There was also a possibility that one could advance into the ultimate God realm. Nevertheless, Jian Wushuang refused such a rare opportunity. He rejected such a golden opportunity? Why did he reject it? Many disciples around were staring at Jian Wushuang with deep jealousy flashed in their eyes. Of course, several reasonable disciples were more understanding. He could rival second-class divine demons in the early-stage chaotic realm. I believe only such a peerless monster dared to bluntly reject Fan Jianxian. Yes, such a monster is no longer limiting his horizon within Wuxia Wilderness. He must have a greater vision. Although Fan Jianxian is capable, it's not guaranteed if he was qualified to accept such a peerless monster as his personal disciple. If I had talents like Jian Wushuang, I would also not go for Fan Jianxian. I would probably find an opportunity to be a disciple of a more powerful master, perhaps a saint. There was a lot of discussion going on and each disciple had their point of view. Jian Wushuang, who was under everyone's scrutiny and the topic of discussion, did not change his expression at all. It seemed as though he had nothing to do with Pang Tao's claim and the heated discussion regarding him. Once again, Pang Tao stared at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, the reason I've said so much is to address your talent in understanding the sword principle. You are indeed an incredible sword principle genius, a genius who is not confined by your realm. Among all those disciples who are good at sword skills and have entered the tomb, you are the one most likely to pass the 8th trial bridges test beside me. Hence, I immediately came for you when I learned that Narcissus Island is among the first 3 sects who entered the inner area and had confirmed your identity. I'm sure that you must be the one who passed the test of the 8 trial bridge. The Purple Blood Saint's inheritance is definitely in your hands now. Pang Tao said resolutely and full of confidence. The surrounding disciples all looked at Jian Wushuang. They had never heard of Jian Wushuang before. They did not think that Jian Wushuang could pass the 8th trial bridges test when they noticed that he was just a chaotic realm, so they were skeptical of Pang Tao's statements. They had since changed their viewpoints after knowing Jian Wushuang's true details and his incredible past deeds. The test of the 8th trial bridge was extremely difficult. Perhaps, only an incredible monster like Jian Wushuang could pass the test. On Narcissus Island's side, Zhong Yi and Su Tong were exchanging looks. They came forward to defend Jian Wushuang earlier, but it was useless for them to persist after Jian Wushuang's information was exposed. Many disciples were convinced that Jian Wushuang had passed the test. Moreover, Pang Tao had also confirmed the matter, hence it's useless for them to continue denying it. Finally, Jian Wushuang raised his head as a smile crept onto his face. You're right. I've passed the test of the 8th trial bridge. Chapter 24-25. Why do you deserve it? He admitted it. He admitted, exclaimed those people around suddenly. Jian Wushuang admitted that he had passed the 8th trial bridges test before many genius disciples. It really is you. Pang Tao's face flushed red. Jian Wushuang flipped his hands and took out 2 jade slips. These 2 jade slips are the items I obtained after crossing the 8th trial bridge. The first jade slip is Purple Blood Saint's insights on sword principle, while the second jade slip is the Purple Blood Sword skill, which was self-invented by Purple Blood Saint. I have all of it here, but why should I give you these 2 jade slips? What makes you think you deserve it? What makes you think you deserve it? These simple 7 words made everyone around him stagnate. So what if Jian Wushuang had admitted to it? He won the 2 jade slips through testifying his strength, so he was the rightful owner. Why should he give it away to Pang Tao for nothing? These 2 jade slips belong to me. These 2 jade slips are the reason I came into Saint's tomb, and I have absolute confidence that I can pass the test of the 8th trial bridge. You have the time advantage because I spent a little longer in the outer area of the tomb and came in late. Now, I want to get back what rightfully belongs to me, said Pang Tao coldly. He sounded extremely confident, but the disciples around were not fools. Contemptuous rose in their hearts when they heard of Pang Tao's claim. What a joke! Did he think it was easy to pass the 8th bridges test? If it was so easy, it would not have remained till today. Although Pang Tao was talented in sword skills and his master was Fan Jianxian, 99% of the people still did not think that he could easily pass the 8th trial bridges test. They thought it was funny that Pang Tao flagrantly claimed the 2 jade slips were meant to be his. As expected, before Jian Wushuang could say anything, Zhong Yi from Narcissus Island rebuked, Pang Tao, you are the core disciple of the Great Compassion sect, and one of the 12 minor kings. How can you carry yourself in such a manner? Opportunities have always resided with the one who is well prepared and competent. Let's not mention that even if you were given the chance, you will never be able to pass the 8th trial bridges test. Now that the opportunity has fallen into junior brother Wushuang's hands, it rightfully belongs to him, keeping to the order of arrival. That's right. Pang Tao, how insolent of you to say that. Su Tong added. Did you just call me insolent? Ha! Pang Tao smiled coldly as he threw frivolous looks at the surrounding disciples. Their expressions changed as the genius disciples from various sects met Pang Tao's gaze. They came from many different sects and they were also arrogant to a certain extent, but they became timid in the face of Pang Tao. The reverence was not only because of Pang Tao's power but also due to the Great Compassion sect where Pang Tao belonged. As the top sect in the Wuxia wilderness, The Great Compassion sect had a transcendent existence and was recognized as an overlord. The sect had always acted somewhat overbearing and arrogant, which the other sects had long gotten used to. Usually, the other sects would try to avoid the Great Compassion sect and tolerated it. No one had the guts to challenge them head-on. Although they witnessed the incident, they felt it had nothing to do with them. Even when they saw Pang Tao acting unscrupulously because of his terrifying background, no one dared to speak out for Narcissus Island. Pang Tao took in all of their expressions and scoffed before speaking again. "Very well, since you call me insolent, I will not push you to dead ends. Jian Wushuang, I can allow you to make a copy of the contents in both jade slips, but you have to hand over the 2 jade slips to me. How about that?" Pang Tao looked down at Jian Wushuang with a touch of loftiness in his words and actions. When the people around heard him, their lips secretly pouted in disgust. However, in Pang Tao's opinion, he was being very kind to allow Jian Wushuang in making a copy of the contents. The corners of Jian Wushuang's mouth curled up with a strange arc when facing the cold stare from Pang Tao. With a flip of his palms, both jade slips returned into his interspatial ring before folding his hands and casually asked, "What if I don't agree?" Pang Tao's face turned dark. "You don't agree? Then you'll have to die here." "Really? Perhaps I should try." Jian Wushuang kept his smile. Jian Wushuang, Zhong Yi, Su Tong, and the others were surprised by his response. Although Pang Tao was being unreasonable, it was no joke if he were to duel with Pang Tao. "Young boy, it seems that you really wanted to die." Pang Tao's voice was harsh and a faint murderous intent rose in his eyes. Before he threw out any moves, "Pang Tao, what do you want to do?" A stern voice emerged, followed by several figures rushing in quickly, appearing in front of Jian Wushuang in a blink of an eye, blocking Jian Wushuang behind their bodies. They were the disciples of the Ancient Star Temple headed by Zhuo Bing and Ling Dan. It's the Ancient Star Temple's Ice Queen and Ling Dan. Ling Dan is one of the 12 minor kings. Someone immediately pointed out the identities of Zhuo Bing and Ling Dan. "Brother, are you okay?" Zhuo Bing turned and looked at Jian Wushuang. "Big sister, am okay? Why are you here?" Jian Wushuang asked with a smile. "We were already in the inner area and were just nearby. Senior brother Ling Dan and I rushed over immediately when I heard that Pang Tao was finding fault with Narcissus Island. Don't worry, big sister is here. I'll not let anyone hurt you," said Zhuo Bing in a deep voice. Jian Wushuang raised his brows. His big sister really treated him well. However, were those people from the Ancient Star Temple able to stop Pang Tao? "Ling Dan, this matter has nothing to do with the Ancient Star Temple. You should leave." Pang Tao stared at Ling Dan with cold eyes. As for Zhuo Bing, she was not a threat at all. Among the younger disciples of Wuxia Wilderness, the 12 minor kings were the most outstanding group. Although some other young cultivators had powers that were close to the 12 minor kings, there was still a gap between their strengths in a real battle. There were many talented disciples standing in front of Pang Tao, but only Ling Dan, one of the 12 minor kings, got his attention. He did not care much about the others. "Sorry, Jian Wushuang is my junior sister, Zhuo Bing's brother. If you're looking for trouble with him, I can't pretend to not see it." Ling Dan looked at Pang Tao solemnly. Ling Dan ranked lower among the 12 minor kings as neither his strength nor status were as good as Pang Tao. He would not fight against Pang Tao unless necessary. However, he would never let Pang Tao hurt Jian Wushuang for the sake of Zhuo Bing. Chapter 24-26. The Big Fight. Ling Dan, do you mean you want to bear the brunt of the attack? Do you think you can stop me? Pang Tao coldly challenged. "Well, let's find out." Ling Dan was not too afraid. "If that's the case, I'll first maim you then kill the kid." Pang Tao aimed his first shot as soon as he finished speaking. Swoosh! A phantom-like figure swept around violently and dived down along with the emergence of a remarkable sword essence. The sword essence dissipated far and wide as it instantly covered the entire area, just as though a huge ocean of sword essences filled the area between the heavens and earth. Everyone was immersed within that sword essence ocean. "This sword essence is not bad." Jian Wushuang secretly nodded. Just from his sword essence alone, he could see that Pang Tao's sword principle understanding had already reached the profound sword principle realm. In fact, he had been at that level for some time and was not far from achieving complete sword principle realm. Pang Tao's figure suddenly appeared from the sword essence. The moment he appeared, three beams of sword lights gleamed. Those three sword light beams were dazzling, each of them obscuring the heavens and the sun, attracting the attention of everyone present. So glaringly bright. Are these sword lights? Why do I feel like there are three suns? It's so dazzling and very powerful. Many had to close their eyes as the sword light flashed and blinded their sights. Senior brother Ling Dan, Zhuo Bing's complexion slightly changed. Pang Tao's strength had exceeded her expectations and she was worried about Ling Dan. Don't worry, leave it to me. Ling Dan smiled confidently and stepped forward. He flipped his palm and a rather unusual weapon appeared in his hand. It was nearly a 2 meters long trident. The trident's three prongs were extremely sharp. It exuded a faint cold light as the sword light's glitters reflected on its surface. As Ling Dan divine power exploded out, his trident stabbed ahead and beams of divine power shot out at the speed of lighting from all three trident tips, which happened to collide with the three sword lights from Pang Tao. Bang, bang, bang. Three loud noises crackled almost at the same time. As divine powers came sweeping down, Ling Dan and Pang Tao's figures clashed into each other again. Swoosh, swoosh, clang, clang. The sounds of wind breaking and collisions between weapons continuously reverberated. Both Pang Tao and Ling Dan were swiftly moving around. Those people around could only notice two ghostly figures colliding but were unable to discern their moves. Judging from appearances, those two seemed to be evenly matched. So powerful! Is this the strength of the 12 minor kings? The people around were awe-stricken. Both Pang Tao and Ling Dan were first-class divine demons, but being one of the 12 minor kings, their combat powers were far better than an ordinary first-class divine demons. Even Jian Wushuang was secretly nodding in approval. Although Pang Tao is not a righteous person, he is indeed powerful. His combat powers should have reached the level of peak divine demon realm. He might stand a chance to win if he fights against a true peak divine demon. As for Ling Dan, his strength is still a far cry from Pang Tao, mumbled Jian Wushuang to himself. It may seem that those two were evenly matched, but Jian Wushuang had sharp observational skills. He noticed that Ling Dan had tried his best, but Pang Tao was still going easy on him and had not even displayed his full force. True to his observations, a scornful smile appeared on Pang Tao's face after a while. Ling Dan, is this just what you are capable of? Ling Dan's face changed. You think about stopping me with this level of power? It's ridiculous. Pang Tao sneered. His figure that was already moving at high speeds instantly doubled upon being engulfed by the power of laws. Pang Tao was already moving at a terrifying speed before when fighting against Ling Dan, and it was already hard for everyone around to see his silhouette. In spite of that, he still doubled up his speed. What was going on? In terms of speed, Pang Tao had completely surpassed Ling Dan. Swoosh! Pang Tao's figure instantly burst out and was too fast for Ling Dan to react. A sword shadow quietly appeared beside Ling Dan. No good. Ling Dan's face drastically changed. He quickly withdrew his trident to resist, only to find that not only had Pang Tao sped up in his movements, but his sword moves were also much faster than before. It was too late for Ling Dan's trident to parry off the attack. A beam of sword light pierced through Ling Dan's body. It went into his body with a huge, impactful blow, which was transmitted to Ling Dan's divine body through his battle armor. Puff! Ling Dan directly spouted a big mouthful of blood and fell into an embarrassing state. Pang Tao smiled coldly at the sight. He wasted no time and turned towards Jian Wushuang. Swoosh! The terrifying speed erupted again, but it was aimed directly at Jian Wushuang this time. Ling Dan could not stop him as he had not even recovered from the last attack. Pang Tao was aiming to kill Jian Wushuang. Zhuo Bing was tremendously shocked by the scene, yet she immediately looked at Zhong Yi and Su Tong next to her. Let's join forces and stop him. Okay. Zhong Yi and Su Tong exchanged looks and both nodded solemnly. They came from Narcissus Island and were in the same sect as Jian Wushuang. It was only natural for them to protect Jian Wushuang from Pang Tao's attack. Zhuo Bing, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong attacked at the same time. All three of them were first-class divine demons and were powerful in combat. Together, they were confident that they could manage Pang Tao for a while. When Pang Tao saw the three of them taking action, he contemptuously smiled. Such confidence. Boom. Pang Tao increased his speed again by nearly 30%. One should not take the 30% lightly, as it had completely caught Zhuo Bing, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong by surprise. Zoom. A fierce and swift sword light cut away all obstacles in front of him. Zhuo Bing, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong, the three first-class divine demons, were completely thrown aside. Though all three of them were already giving their best shot, they were still crushed ruthlessly by the sword light. Pang Tao maintained his speed and charged towards Jian Wushuang. Nothing was in his way this time. I was going to spare your life initially as long as you obediently hand over those 2 jade slips, but now, you can't blame me. Even if you're a genius, you would be no different from a useless piece of log after you die. 1. Pang Tao's eyes were chilly. 1. Genius and a useless piece of log both have the same pronunciation on the second word in Chinese, a kind of wordplay by the author. Hence, it's a common saying to call someone gifted genius, which is, and refer to someone weak as. Chapter 24-27. Long Zishan Jian Wushuang had stood at the same spot, observing Pang Tao injuring Ling Dan before Zhuo Bing, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong continued with their collaborative attacks after Pang Tao had dispersed them. Despite all that, his face remained incredibly calm and still, but concealed deep in his eyes was a sharp shining beam of light. In a flash, Pang Tao had already appeared before Jian Wushuang. Die, kid! Pang Tao's viciousness was overwhelming, and coupled with his terrifying speed, he was about to cut off Jian Wushang's head with the sword in his hand. Stop! A sudden yell exploded in the air. Every single person's heart trembled, as that was a yell that did not allow disobedience. Even Pang Tao could not help but to stop his motion when hearing that explosive yell. He looked behind himself and saw a young man in purple armor. It's Long Zishan, third-ranked, one of the 12 minor kings from Great Compassion sect. People around immediately recognized the man in purple armor. Senior brother Zishan? Pang Tao's face changed. If he was someone else, Pang Tao would have completely ignored him. However, Long Zishan was not only his senior brother but also someone he very much respected. What are you doing, Pang Tao? Long Zishan's expression was stern. Senior brother Zishan, the 8th trial bridge has been broken through by Jian Wushuang. He now possesses the relics that Purple Blood Saint had left behind. I only want to take back what's rightfully mine, replied Pang Tao. What a joke! The rules have always been such that the relics belong to one with good morals. Purple Blood Saint's legacy naturally goes to him, since the trial has been broken through by this junior brother from Narcissus Island. What do you think you're doing? Are you trying to rob? Or are you trying to bully others? You've embarrassed all of us in the Great Compassion sect. Long Zishan did not save Pang Tao's face at all as he scolded him in front of everyone. Senior brother Zishan. Pang Tao's face was filled with dissatisfaction. He also felt a little angry inside and was ready to express it. Step back immediately. Long Zishan quietly growled, but secretly gave Pang Tao a look. Pang Tao understood the signal and stepped back, even though he was not satisfied. Seeing that Pang Tao had listened to him, Long Zishan sighed in relief and immediately looked over at Jian Wushuang with his attitude becoming a lot warmer. You must be junior brother Wushuang from Narcissus Island? My hot-headed junior brother Pang Tao recklessly took action just now. Sorry for offending you. Here is an interspatial ring with plenty of elixirs inside it. Please take it as a token of apology. We hope you and all the friends from Narcissus Island will forgive us. Long Zishan tossed over an interspatial ring that he had prepared towards Jian Wushuang as he was speaking. Jian Wushuang grabbed the ring but did not look inside it. He deeply looked at Long Zishan with a strange light in his eyes. All those disciples around started praising him in their minds. Among the 4 minor kings in the Great Compassion sect, Long Zishan was considered the most mild-mannered and enjoyed the highest acclaim. His appearance today proved the saying to be true. Long Zishan was a very reasonable person judging from his apologetic actions. He was also a very good representative of the Great Compassion sect, causing everyone to feel a sense of respect towards them. However, Pang Tao's expression was extremely uneasy. He did not say anything but had already sent a message through his token and asked Long Zishan, "Senior brother Zishan, what's happening here?" Pang Tao was slightly puzzled. Long Zishan secretly replied to him, "Junior brother, you have gone a little overboard today. It's true that the Great Compassion sect is the largest sect in Wuxia Wilderness, the most powerful existence. We can usually do whatever we want in Wuxia Wilderness, and others would have let us have our way even though we're being a little reckless. They would even swallow their pride to not offend us, but that's also on the basis that we could find certain excuses or reasoning on our side. As for today, if you found even just a little bit of reasoning or excuses, you could have done whatever you wanted. Even if you killed Jian Wushuang, so be it. You could have even killed Zhong Yi of Narcissus Island and Ling Dan of Ancient Star Temple without fear, and the Great Compassion sect would back you up after you've done it. The problem here is that you're obviously being unreasonable. The 8th Trial Bridges challenge was broken through by Jian Wushuang with his very own abilities, and now you're asking for what he has earned. That's simply robbery. In addition, you're being so reckless in front of everyone. At this moment, a few elders from Narcissus Island outside have already reached Senior Brother Tu Qianxing and a few of our elders, questioning the thieving behavior of Great Compassion sect's disciples. Our elders from the Great Compassion sect understood that we're in the wrong and could not give a convincing answer, hence the reason they sent me here to stop you. Is that so? Pang Tao finally understood. He knew that Senior Brother Zishan was usually more conniving and often acted as unreasonable as they were, sometimes even more reckless. Senior Brother Zishan had always let him be, but he was there to represent the sect and scolded him in front of so many people. Listen, Junior Brother Pang Tao, as long as we have reasons or excuses, you can do whatever you want. That's the Great Compassion sect's way of being. However, if what you do doesn't come with a reason and was simply because you want to destroy someone, that's fine as well. However, you will have to do it in the dark and not out in public. You can't be so careless, especially right before all these sections. Do you understand? Long Zishan advised. Understood, Senior Brother Zishan, but that Jian Wushuang. Pang Tao still did not feel satisfied. You fool, you definitely can't kill him in front of so many people, but you can always wait a little while. When the 6 positions appear, all disciples from every sect would definitely try to frantically fight for it. It would be a bloodbath at that time and you wouldn't have to worry anymore. Wouldn't it be easier to kill Jian Wushuang then? Long Zishan giggled. Pang Tao felt a little excited inside. Now I understand. When we're in the midst of a battle, I'll stand by Jian Wushuang and wait for my chance. If Jian Wushuang was also going to fight for a position, I'll kill him with the most thorough methods. Even if he doesn't partake in the competition, I could still find ways to push him into the battlefield which would be merciless at that point. Narcissus Island probably wouldn't dare to say much if I accidentally killed him then. At most, I would apologize to them afterward. Apologize? Since it's on the battlefield, getting killed in chaos would only be due to his own inadequacy. Why the need to apologize? Long Zishan sneered frostily. Pang Tao's anger was completely under control after hearing what Long Zishan had said. He raised his head again and looked at Jian Wushuang with his icy cold eyes. Chapter 24-28. News spreading, Senior Brother Zishan is right, I have lots of opportunities to kill him. I'll let the kid live for a few more days since that's the case, Pang Tao told himself. However, what he did not know was that Jian Wushuang looked at him with a touch of ridicule. In Pang Tao's mind, Jian Wushuang had managed to live because of Long Zishan's arrival. On the contrary, the person Long Zishan had rescued was actually in fact Pang Tao himself. During that split second, Jian Wushuang had the intention to kill Pang Tao. If Long Zishan had not arrived in time, Pang Tao would have turned into a corpse. However, neither Pang Tao, Long Zishan, nor anyone around knew that. At the surface, Long Zishan was still scolding Pang Tao. "Junior brother, you're really too reckless this time. Prepare for your punishment when you go back." "Understood." Pang Tao nodded without any feeling of dissatisfaction. "Come with me," said Long Zishan, who led Pang Tao and the rest of his group to leave this place. All the disciples from Narcissus Island gave a huge sigh of relief after watching Long Zishan, Pang Tao, and the rest left this place. They're finally gone. Zhong Yi and Su Tong both felt a burden unloaded. Pang Tao alone had already given them an immense amount of pressure. They could not imagine how terrorizing it would be if Long Zishan joined in the mix. "Little brother, are you all right?" Zhuobing went up to Jian Wushuang. "I'm fine, but I feel bad getting senior brother Ling Dan involved." Jian Wushuang looked at Ling Dan. Ling Dan was the first one who tried stopping Pang Tao but got injured instead. His face was still pale. "He'll live. It's more important that junior brother Wushuang is all right." Ling Dan smiled after noticing Jian Wushuang was looking at him. Jian Wushuang was Zhuobing's younger brother, therefore he wanted to do his best to protect Jian Wushuang in front of Zhuobing. Unfortunately, his ability was not up to par. Luckily, not all disciples from the Great Compassion sect are bullies. "At least this Long Zishan is reasonable and knows his place," said Zhuobing. "Reasonable? Know his place? He's just smarter, that's all." Jian Wushuang could not help but laughed. It was true. Even though they were both core disciples of the Great Compassion sect, and one of the 12 minor kings, Long Zishan was a lot smarter than Pang Tao. At the very least, in terms of his behavior and mannerisms, Long Zishan had a good reputation on the surface. However, who knew what kind of person was he in the dark? Junior brother Wushuang. All the disciples from Narcissus Island walked up to him. Zhong Yi and Su Tong both looked at Jian Wushuang with mixed emotions. Junior brother Wushuang, was what Pang Tao just said true? The rest of the disciples also looked at Jian Wushuang, waiting for an answer. Although they believed a big part of it, they still felt it was hard to believe, hence they needed to hear it from Jian Wushuang himself. Looking at everyone's answer-seeking eyes, Jian Wushuang laughed. "That was a very long time ago. It's no big deal." Jian Wushuang sounded extremely calm, but the fact he had admitted it remained. At that point, all of them, Zhong Yi, Su Tong, and all the Narcissus Island disciples on site, gasped, feeling even more stunned. They finally understood why Elder Wu Jian would defend Jian Wushuang with all his might and send him into Saint's tomb. It turned out that it was not due to any special relationship between them, but because Elder Wu Jian knew of Jian Wushuang's background as a rarely seen superior demon. A superior demon such as him should deserve to get the highest level of nurturing. Zhong Yi took a deep breath and continued asking, "Junior brother Wushuang, there's something that I don't quite understand. When Bai Yu and Elder Wu Jian invited you at the same time, why did you reject the Great Compassion sect to become the personal disciple of Fan Jianxian? Instead, you chose to become a regular outer disciple on Narcissus Island." The rest of them also had the same question. People tend to move up to higher places. Anybody would wish to join sects that were stronger to get more resources and have more improvement space. Perhaps it was understandable that Jian Wushuang refused to join the Great Compassion sect out of dislike for them. However, what was incomprehensible was that he happily became an outer disciple when he could have easily become a Narcissus Island core disciple or even the Lord's personal disciple. Jian Wushuang laughed and said, "The reason is simple. I just didn't want too many constraints." "That's it." Everyone was surprised. "That is it." Jian Wushuang nodded again. The core disciples from Narcissus Island speechlessly looked at each other and shrugged in the end. All of them could only assume that a superior demon like Jian Wushuang's thought process was different from theirs. "Little brother, at this moment, the genius disciples in the entire Saint's tomb have already known about you inheriting the relics left behind by Purple Blood Saint. There are bound to be people with inconceivable ideas. You need to be careful from now on, especially that Pang Tao. I've got a feeling he won't just stop here," said Zhuobing solemnly. "Yes, I understand. I'll be careful," said Jian Wushuang. The field very soon became quiet. The many various sects' disciples who came to watch had also left. The news spread like wildfire as well upon their departure. It did not take long before every sect's genius disciples in Saint's tomb knew that Jian Wushuang had the items left behind by Purple Blood Saint. At the same time, the story of Jian Wushuang's terrifying talents had also spread to every corner of Saint's tomb. All of a sudden, there was a huge quake among the people in Saint's tomb. It could not be helped because Jian Wushuang's battle records were too incredible. There was nobody who was unmoved by that story when they heard it. His name began to spread among the sects for the very first time as Jian Wushuang, an ultimate demon who lived among people. In a hidden room within Saint's tomb, Crimson Stone Saint's remnant consciousness had always been there, and that consciousness was extended into every corner of the tomb. Anything that happened within could not escape his knowledge. Naturally, he had noticed when Pang Tao and his gang were picking a fight with Jian Wushuang. The person he was interested in was not Pang Tao but Jian Wushuang instead. Anyways, he had always been interested in Jian Wushuang. Crimson Stone Saint had also heard everything Pang Tao said, the various information about Jian Wushuang. Profound achievement in sword principles at 16 years old. Killed third-class divine demon with the level of chaotic realm, and overpowered 2 second-class divine demon head-to-head at 19 years old. Achieved completion in sword principles as a peak stage chaotic realm, passed the 8th Trial Bridges challenges and obtained the relics left behind by Purple Blood Saint this year at 21 years old. This little boy called Jian Wushuang really is not just talented, Chapter 24-29. Joining hands. Even Crimson Stone Saint exclaimed after knowing about Jian Wushuang's story. He was a well-respected undying saint and had witnessed various genius experts amidst traveling throughout the ancient god domain when he was still immortal. Among them, there were some truly mesmerizing demons and monsters. Even so, he had never heard of a 16-year-old demon achieving profound achievement regardless of how impressive that 16-year-old was. As for an early-stage chaotic realm that could go head-on and overpower a second-class divine demon, that was even more unbelievable. If not hearing it directly from Gold Cauldron sect's Na Qianyuan, even Crimson Stone Saint himself would have trouble believing it, not to mention genius disciples from various sections. Even Crimson Stone Saint himself had never seen or even heard of such a monster. Crimson Stone Saint became even more curious about Jian Wushuang after discovering it. If he could overpower second-class divine demon while still being in early-stage chaotic realm, his ability must have gone up a whole lot, now that he's at the peak stage chaotic realm and also had achieved a breakthrough in his sword principle cultivation level. I suppose his battle strength is perhaps comparable to a peak divine demon? I wonder where he is positioned in comparison to those few geniuses in the tomb. In a few more days, I want to observe in detail when the competition for those 6 positions begins. After that, it was extremely peaceful in the saint's tomb. Genius disciples from all sects tried breaking through those challenges on the Bridge of Trials with nobody else creating any more troubles. As for Jian Wushuang, although everyone knew that he possessed Purple Blood Saint's relics and some felt slight greed to possess them, all of them held back with nobody daring to take any actions. Almost in the blink of an eye, Saint's tomb had been opened for almost a month. In the fields where Narcissus Island disciples gathered, the disciples from Ancient Star Temple had chosen to station there as well. Zhuobing, Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong gathered together. It's almost time. If nothing's out of expectations, the competition for those 6 positions will begin these few days, said Ling Dan, Feng Tian Scroll. For all of us, it's such a precious opportunity to be able to study Feng Tian Scroll. Hence, when those 6 positions appear, there's bound to be a bloodied fight over it, mumbled Zhuobing. Zhong Yi and Su Tong, I gather you're both interested in those positions as well? Ling Dan looked at them. That's for sure. Zhong Yi and Su Tong simultaneously nodded. Why don't we join hands since that's the case? Ling Dan suggested. Joining hands? Zhong Yi and Su Tong both felt surprised. It's such that if there is a position token that appears near our area when the competition begins, all 4 of us could use our full might to fight for it. However, if any among us successfully obtains a position token, the other three should not fight for it, and have to do their best to help him fend off genius disciples from other sects instead, said Ling Dan. Hearing that, Zhong Yi and Su Tong looked at each other and nodded without much hesitation. Sure. It would be exceptionally difficult to get one position token relying only on junior sister Su Tong and myself. However, if we join forces with brother Ling Dan and Miss Zhuobing, we might be able to get one if luck permits, said Zhong Yi. Well then, it's decided. From my investigation today, even though there are many sects surrounding us in this area, there aren't many who are very skilled. Furthermore, I'm the only 12 minor king. If we four join hands and a position token really appears around here, there shouldn't be anyone qualified to fight against us over it. Ling Dan smiled. However, as soon as he spoke, there were a few black dots dashing towards them from the void not far away. They soon had appeared within their sight. These are people from the Great Compassion sect? With Pang Tao leading? What is he doing here? Zhuobing, Ling Dan, and the other Narcissus Island disciples were stunned. However, Pang Tao did not come up to provoke them this time. They instead stopped somewhere rather close to them. Afterward, the 10 Great Compassion sect disciples led by Pang Tao found a place and settled down. Damn it, this Pang Tao also plans to wait in this area? Ling Dan said quietly. Saint's tomb was very large, and even though the inner area was not as big as the outer area, it was still not a small place per se. Those 6 position tokens that symbolized the right to study Feng Tian scroll could appear at any time on any corner of the inner area. They could appear anywhere, so it was largely luck dependent on whether one could find them. All the various sects' genius disciples were scattered in different places within the inner area, waiting patiently for their opportunities. However, no sects wished for any opponents who could form a threat to lurk around the area they were in. It would only mean that a strenuous fight would occur with such an opponent around, should a position token appear in that area. Pang Tao from the Great Compassion sect was undoubtedly a strong opponent in the eyes of disciples from Narcissus Island and Ancient Star Temple. Previously, Ling Dan thought that if Ancient Star Temple and Narcissus Island joined hands, they could dominate that area, and no other sects could withstand them. However, now that Pang Tao had appeared, the situation was completely different. This Pang Tao, he's most probably here for us, said Zhong Yi coldly. Correct. When he was taken away by Long Zishan, I could see how dissatisfied he was and would look for a chance to make a move on junior brother Wushuang, and now he simply settles close to us. As soon as the competition begins, he would have the chance to do something to junior brother Wushuang. Su Tong agreed. Little brother. Zhuobing's expression turned cold and called out. Jian Wushuang, who was sitting on a broken rock studying purple blood sword principle, gradually opened his eyes and walked over. Big sister, what is the matter? Jian Wushuang smiled. Look over there. Zhuobing signaled Jian Wushuang with her eyes. Jian Wushuang immediately looked at the direction she was gazing at, noticing Pang Tao and the others from the Great Compassion sect. Oh, they're camping close by. Looks like he's looking for a chance to get me. Jian Wushuang smiled. It's good that you know. He wouldn't make a move since the competition for those token positions hasn't begun. However, the inner area will be incredibly chaotic once it starts. If such a token appears in our area, all of us including Pang Tao will fight for it. You need to retreat to the battlefield's edge and not join in or stay too close to avoid getting dragged into it so that Pang Tao couldn't find a chance. Understand? Zhuobing advised. Gotcha, he'll be careful. My life is extremely precious after all. Jian Wushuang smiled mildly, with not the least bit of worry in his mind. Chapter 2430. The frenzy began. Crimson Stone Saint flipped his hand in the hidden space, and a white-colored token suddenly appeared. He mysteriously smiled while looking at the white token. It's about time, let's begin. The first position token. Kid, we'll see how you fare. Crimson Stone Saint swung his hand as he exclaimed, turning the white token into a flash before it vanished. Go. The giant structure of the saint's tomb shook. The tremors were very violent, as if the grounds were shattering and mountains moving. The sudden changes startled those genius disciples in the inner area. Is it starting? Many disciples' eyes were burning with enthusiasm. Meanwhile, in the area where Jian Wushuang was located, Narcissus Island, Ancient Star Temple, Great Compassion Sect led by Pang Tao, and disciples from many other sects were gathered there and waited calmly. Jian Wushuang immediately stood up with everyone when the saints' tombs started trembling. It's coming. I wonder where the first position token will appear. Zhuobing, Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong felt fanatically excited. All of them were truly looking forward to it. Right then, a roaring rumble tore through the air. The ground suddenly broke open in the area where Jian Wushuang and his companions were, shooting up a blinding white light beam from below. In the blink of an eye, the white light moved into the middle of the void and appeared in front of all those disciples. The genius disciples on the scene were all stunned. That's a position token? The first position token. A number of them could not recover from the amazement. One should know that the inner area was extremely large, and the place those 6 position tokens would appear was random. Those genius disciples from various sects could only rely on their own luck. Obviously, none of those disciples expected such good fortune to have the first position token appearing in their local area. It was a short surprise which became chaotic the next moment. Do it! Grab it quick! The token is mine! Shouts suddenly filled the air. The total number of genius disciples was around 100, and in that instant, other than a small number of second-class divine demons, most disciples dashed towards the floating white token in the void. For example, Pang Tao from the Great Compassion Sect did not miss a beat, taking the lead with 2 first-class and 7 second-class divine demons from his sect following right behind him. Pang Tao's face was stern as he had set his mind in seizing the white token. Little brother, stay far away and don't get involved in the battle. After Zhuobing advised Jian Wushuang, she turned to her companions. Everyone, let's do this. Right. Move. Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, Su Tong along with the more capable second-class divine demon disciples from Narcissus Island and Ancient Star Temple sprung into action. Lines of figures charged rapidly towards the white token. As for Jian Wushuang, he did not take action at this first moment. He stood there at the same place and observed calmly instead. The fight had begun. It's mine. The first token is mine. A young man in an elegant sky-blue long robe laughed maniacally. He was a second-class divine demon that was physically the closest to the white token. Hence he was the first to arrive and naturally held the white token in his hand. However, as soon as he caught the token and was about to keep it in his interspatial ring. Watch out! Somebody suddenly shouted. The warning came from a first-class divine demon who was also from the same sect as the young man. The young man's face changed, but he could not react in time as a strange scarlet light beam went through his body and instantly ended his life. A petite young lady in red with a frosty expression was right next to the young man, and the strange scarlet light was actually her cold-looking spear which was currently floating in front of her. She immediately reached out to grab the white token upon killing the young man. Bush, bush, bush. 3 fatal attacks were directed right at her. 2 of those attacks were sent by 2 second-class divine demons. However, the third stroke was released by a first-class divine demon. Damn! The young lady in red clenched her teeth, forcibly halted her steps, and dashed sideways at the same time to avoid those attacks. A ghastly dark figure appeared next to the young man's body and extended his large hand to take the young man's interspatial ring and white token. A giant mountain appeared out of nowhere above the darkly clad figure, and more than 10 attacks were sent out from around him at the same time. No! The darkly clad figure got stunned. Although he was quite a capable first-class divine demon, it was just too difficult facing so many attacks from every direction. Boom, boom, boom. Noises of impacts were heard. The darkly clad figure gave his all but still could not ward off all the attacks. Finally, his body suddenly collapsed after getting hit by a few attacks. Thus ended the life of a first-class divine demon. Just in such a short time, 2 divine demons, a second-class and a first-class, respectively died under a crowd of attacks. However, that was only the beginning. Following that, kill. Kill whoever seizes the token. The position token is mine. Anybody who dares to take it will receive no mercy. Manically shouts filled the edge of the skies. The competition started as soon as the position token appeared, and so were the killings. This is pretty crazy. Jian Wushuang stood idly at the edge of the battlefield and observed everything that was happening. Those sect geniuses could still coexist peacefully, not only in the outer area but also in the inner area when trying out the challenges on the Bridge of Trials. However, they started their bloody fights as soon as the position token appeared. This only showed the importance of the position token and the strong desires of all disciples from every sect over the Feng Tian scroll. However, due to the extremely crazy competition, more than 10 disciples fell shortly after the battle started, and one of them was even a first-class divine demon. After all, first-class divine demons usually had a safety token and would break it as soon as they encountered a crisis. Up to that point, nobody had the chance to store the white token into their interspatial ring. As soon as someone got close to the white token, people around would issue coordinated attacks and kill them on the spot. Hence, the white token was still floating midair and illuminating its white light, stirring greed in all of the disciples there. In such a frenzied competition, even first-class divine demons who were extremely capable did not dare to be reckless. Chapter 2431. The seas. There were as many as 100 genius disciples from various sects surrounding the white token in that area, but no one dared to take it. Even Pang Tao, who was considered the strongest among all. Pang Tao gathered with a few disciples from the Great Compassion sect. "Senior brother Pang Tao, aren't we taking it?" asked a first-class divine demon disciple. "If we do it now, we'll immediately become everyone's target. Be patient and give it some time." Pang Tao waved his hand. Meanwhile, Zhuobing, Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong also stood together. "What now?" Su Tong frowned hard. "We're obviously at a deadlock right now. No one has the guts to step up because doing so means he'll be attacked by everyone. Even Pang Tao doesn't dare to make a move." Zhong Yi gazed at Pang Tao once and said coldly, "This can't go on forever. Somebody has to break the deadlock." Ling Dan's expression turned gloomy and looked at Zhuobing next to him. Junior sister, Zhuobing could understand Ling Dan's mind through that look. She nodded slightly but still reminded him, "Be careful. Don't worry, worst comes to worst, you'll just use the safety token." Ling Dan plainly smiled and suddenly dashed out. Ling Dan rushed towards the white token at breakneck speeds. In that situation, everyone was keenly watching the white token and being very cautious of each other. As soon as Ling Dan took action, he attracted everyone's attention. "Kill him. Die." A large number of the surrounding disciples, including tens of second-class divine demon and a few first-class divine demons, came rushing towards Ling Dan. At that juncture, no one cared who he was or what was his background. So what, if he was one of the 12 minor kings? He would receive no mercy since he dared to touch the position token. Ling Dan's expression turned gloomy upon noticing the wave of attacks rolling towards him, but he did not stop. Just when all the attacks were about to fall on him, there was a loud ring and a thick layer of golden light rose from his body. The golden light suddenly formed into a golden turtle, wrapping Ling Dan completely within it. All the attacks fell on the golden turtle and made continuous clashing noises. After a wave of clashing noises, the golden turtle broke apart and Ling Dan's body suffered some injuries with blood streaming down a corner of his mouth. Even so, he had withstood the strong waves of attacks. Zhuobing had also taken actions when everyone frenziedly attacked Ling Dan. She was incredibly fast and arrived next to the white token in the blink of an eye. She swiftly waved her hand, and the white token that had been floating in the void had finally been kept in her interspatial ring. That sight simply made all the genius disciples roll their eyes wide with jealousy. "No! Let go of the token. Drop dead." Ling Dan appeared next to Zhuobing in the first moment. The golden turtle rose from his body once again, but it was a lot dimmer this time. Zhuobing had a solemn look on her face, and her body was also glowing with a layer of golden light. They joined hands to fend off those disciples' attacks while propelling themselves towards the direction of Narcissus Island disciples. "Friends, Please give us a hand, said Ling Dan with a low tone. No problem. Zhong Yi and Su Tong did not hesitate. Before the fight started, they had agreed to join hands. After joining hands, regardless of who seized the token, the other three would do their best to give a helping hand to that person. Zhong Yi and Su Tong would naturally do everything they could to help since Zhuo Bing and Ling Dan had obtained the white token. Zhong Yi and Su Tong immediately made their moves. That triggered the anger of everyone surrounding them. Ill be damned, Narcissus Island is joining hands with Ancient Star Temple? Narcissus Island and Ancient Star Temple each have 2 first-class divine demon. That's a total of 4, and among them is Ling Dan, a 12-minor king expert. So what? They dared to take the token, so they deserve to die all the same. Kill. Don't let them get away. The rest of the genius disciples from various sects agreed and surrounded the 4 of them. Zhuo Bing and company made up a coalition of 4 first-class divine demon with the second-class divine demon disciples from Narcissus Island and Ancient Star Temple were also trying their best to assist from the sideline. In such a situation, they could more or less withstand the attacks from the rest. Their next step was to break out from the crowd. As long as they broke out of it, the various sects' genius disciples would find it difficult to do anything to them. Careful! Quickly this way! When the 4 first-class divine demons joined hands and continuously withstood the crowd's attacks, Zhuo Bing also tried getting close to the edge of the crowd. Hey, race a chance! Zhuo Bing felt a little excited. From the look of this situation, the 4 divine demons coalition could very possibly break out of the crowd. However, all of a sudden, "Junior sister, watch out!" shouted someone. Zhuo Bing immediately looked ahead and saw a piercing light sweeping towards her. That was a sword light, an extremely blinding sword light. Tracing back the source of the sword light was Pang Tao, who was projecting a strong energy tide. Together with him were another 2 great compassion sects, first-class divine demons. Zhuo Bing's face changed, and the long red staff in her hand suddenly turned into a long snake, furiously charging outwards. However, when the red staff and blinding sword light collided, that staff which supposedly carried a heaven-shattering fury had been deflected, and Zhuo Bing had to take several steps backward. The few retreating steps caused her to fall back into the crowd. Kill. Everyone around her took the opportunity and charged towards her. Damn it! Zhuo Bing could not hide her frustration. Pang Tao finally can't stay still anymore. Ling Dan's eyes were incredibly gloomy. Supposedly, with 4 first-class divine demons joining hands meant that they could take over the area and had a very big chance of seizing the token, but with Pang Tao's appearance, the abilities that Pang Tao displayed could completely crush all 4 of them. Ice Queen, give me the token or you will die. Pang Tao stared at Zhuo Bing coldly. Are you trying to scare me? Do you think I would be shaken? Zhuo Bing humphed frostily. She had a safety token with her. If she really came across a crisis, she could always escape directly with the safety token. Want to kill her? Pang Tao did not have the skills to do so. You're looking for death. Pang Tao was furious and immediately dashed out. Terrifying energy and power suddenly pressed against Zhuo Bing. Although she was an extremely capable first-class divine demon, when facing Pang Tao, who was one of the 12 minor kings, her mind still felt immense pressure. Chapter 2432, Purple Light Phantom Whoosh. Whoosh, whoosh. The blinding sword light flashed again. Obviously, Pang Tao had no mercy towards a lady as he completely exerted his sword skills. His speed had reached its very limit along with his non-stop attack strokes raining down on Zhuo Bing. Facing such sword skills, Zhuo Bing could only give her all to ward off those attacks, but it was incredibly difficult. Junior sister, I'll block him. Ling Dan rushed over and immediately blocked Pang Tao. Are you sure you can? Pang Tao chuckled. Suddenly the power and speed of his hands surged even more. Zhuo Bing and her coalition were already under immense pressure with only Pang Tao himself, not forgetting to mention that Pang Tao was not the only person she had to worry about. There were other disciples around who also wanted to take her down. Zhuo Bing and the rest could not hold on much longer under their collective assaults. No, we can't hold on much longer, growled Su Tong quietly from the side. Damn, do I really have to forego the token that I have already acquired? Zhuo Bing's face turned frosty. The position token right then was kept inside her interspatial ring. She would surely not want to give up something that she had already obtained. However, the four of them had already fallen inside a deadly circle which was almost impossible to break out. In such a situation, if she did not release the token, she would perhaps have to break the safety token and leave Saint's Tomb. Even if they escaped, they would still have to leave the position token behind. We have no choice. Junior sister, give it up for now. Let's wait for another chance to take it back. Ling Dan sent a message to Zhuo Bing. He was the one who had to endure the biggest pressure among the four of them, as he had already taken some injuries when he tried helping Zhuo Bing to obtain the token. After that, he not only had to face Pang Tao, but another first-class divine demon from the Great Compassion sect was also targeting him. He was being completely overpowered and was just barely hanging on. If this continues for another short moment, he would have no choice but to break the safety token. Seeing that was the case while still feeling extremely unwilling, Zhuo Bing gritted her teeth and made up her mind. As long the verdant hills remained, there would be no shortages of firewood. Zhuo Bing had made up her mind to let go of the position token. However, just as Zhuo Bing and her coalition were being pushed to the edge, no one realized that Jian Wushuang had already disappeared from where he stood outside the battlefield. Jian Wushuang was already in the middle of the crowd at the battlefield's center when he reappeared, standing right behind Zhuo Bing. Big sister, need help? Without any fair warning, Jian Wushuang's voice sounded next to Zhuo Bing's ear. Zhuo Bing shuddered and looked at Jian Wushuang. Little brother, what are you doing here? Zhuo Bing was shocked. She had advised him many times not to get involved in the fight for the positions, not to even get too close to the battlefield in order to avoid giving Pang Tao any opportunity to attack him. Jian Wushuang promised her during that time as well. If that was the case, why did Jian Wushuang directly appear on the battlefield? Go! Leave now! Zhuo Bing yelled. However, Jian Wushuang did not move. On the side, Pang Tao had also noticed Jian Wushuang's arrival. Ha! This kid came into the battlefield like an idiot, trying to help his big sis? Pang Tao could not hide his excitement. Right on. I was still wondering when I could kill him, and now he presented himself as a gift? Just as the saying goes, you choose not the paved path to heaven, but break into a gateless hell 1L. Pang Tao's eyes were also shining with a thick light of greed. He immediately made up his mind after seeing Jian Wushuang. You too, keep Ling Dan busy, instructed Pang Tao. The other two first-class divine demons from Great Compassion sect immediately went up and kept Ling Dan in a tight web of attacks. With his hands being free, Pang Tao went straight to Jian Wushuang. Pang Tao, stop. I'll give you the position token. Zhuo Bing shouted. Pang Tao sneered. Position token? The position token would need time to fight over it, but Jian Wushuang is standing right in front of me. Pang Tao had no hesitation in his mind. He had already calculated that there would still be enough time to fight for the position token after killing Jian Wushuang and obtaining Purple Blood Saint's relics. Little brother, run. Run now. Zhuo Bing shouted in a frenzy after seeing Pang Tao charging at Jian Wushuang with full ferocity. However, Jian Wushuang did not have any intention to escape. He looked straight at Pang Tao. The Blood Mountain sword had appeared with a flip of his palm. Jian Wushuang then immediately shifted his figure and took the initiative to charge at Pang Tao. You wanna die? Not only did Pang Tao not feel any anger, but he also laughed in return, which his facial expression becoming vicious. Boy, you're the one who's seeking death, don't blame me. Die. With a ring, a blinding sword light lit up. It was like a little sun, shining across the lands. Many people around shut their eyes because of the sword's brightness. That stroke had contained Pang Tao's killing intent and hatred, which were absolutely terrifying. Most importantly, his speed was incredibly fast. It was so fast that nobody around could offer assistance. Little brother. Zhuo Bing opened her eyes wide, feeling desperate. However, Jian Wushuang, who was floating calmly, had also moved the Blood Mountain sword in his hand. Swing, a poignantly beautiful sword light flashed. The sword light contained a mild purple that looked incomparably gorgeous as it sliced through the void. The purple sword light was not blinding, but incredibly demonic, as if the shadows of a purple-colored phantom flying by. The energy from it was calm and leisurely, not as devastating as Pang Tao's stroke. However, it was such a stroke that made Pang Tao's pupils slightly shrink when the beautiful purple light flashed by. This stroke doesn't seem usual. Right when Pang Tao noticed something, Jian Wushuang and Pang Tao had passed by each other. Jian Wushuang stood behind Pang Tao with his sword in one hand. Sword like shadows. Sword like spirits. Drive the sword with shadows. Drive the sword with spirits. So very beautiful like the shadows and spirits. In the purple blood sword principle that Purple Blood Saint created, the third form, Purple Light Phantom, is actually the most beautiful stroke. Jian Wushuang wore a mild smile on his face and mumbled to himself as blood was dripping on the tip of his Blood Mountain sword. As if time and space were frozen. The many genius disciples, including Zhuo Bing, Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong had all stopped their motions and looked at his direction. Shocked filled their eyes. Many people did not see clearly what actually had happened. They could only see that Pang Tao stood like a statue in one place, frozen. His eyes were hollow but filled with absolute horror and with even more disbelief. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but those two words were all he could let out. Phew. A gust of wind blew by and a sizable head went flying. Chapter 24:33. Fearful Silence. The huge battlefield fell into a deathly silence. The various sects' genius disciples on the battlefield instinctively stopped dead in their tracks with all their eyes fixed on the head that flew out with astonishment. They were stunned exactly because all of them knew full well who the owner of that head belonged. The fight had been going on with many sacrificed and it made no difference if another person died. However, it was still shocking that Pang Tao, who ranked 6th among the 12 minor kings, was dead. Dead? Pang Tao is dead? How is this possible? Everyone was in disbelief. The scene sent everyone into a state of stupor. Countless sets of eyes turned towards the young man who walked towards Pang Tao's body. The young man who held a sword in one hand was only exuding the divine powers of a peak chaotic realm. Nevertheless, everyone witnessed that Pang Tao was beheaded by this man in peak chaotic realm. Jian Wushuang soon arrived next to Pang Tao's headless body. He swept his eyes over the body and noticed a token which was held tightly in his palm. That token was Pang Tao's safety token. A moment ago, Pang Tao sensed danger while exchanging blows with Jian Wushuang. He reacted by taking out his safety token and was about to crush it. Unfortunately, his actions were too slow. He was just a small step away from saving himself by crushing the safety token in his hand. However, he died. Under Jian Wushuang's sword, he did not even have the chance to crush his life-saving safety token before dying. Even having a safety token can't save his life. Jian Wushuang smirked and took away Pang Tao's safety token and interspatial ring. He then waved his hand, and Pang Tao's body fell downward. The people around had yet to recover from their daze. Especially Zhuo Bing and Zhong Yi, who was even more shocked than ever. The disciples of the Great Compassion sect were the ones who reacted first. Jian Wushuang, you killed senior brother Pang Tao. Just wait. We from the Great Compassion sect will never let you go. A first-class divine demon from Great Compassion sect shrieked. Jian Wushuang raised his brows and gave the first-class divine demon a side eye and scoffed. Life and death are normal in battles for opportunities. Are you suggesting that only the Great Compassion sect is allowed to wantonly kill someone from other sects, but disciples from other sects aren't allowed to retaliate? If you are so free to be up there talking nonsense, you might as well avenge Pang Tao now. Of course, it depends if you can do so. The first-class divine demon was stunned by Jian Wushuang's rebuttal and was at a loss for words. He indeed had no guts to fight against Jian Wushuang. He was not alone. The genius disciples from various sects around him were terrified of Jian Wushuang. It was no joke since even Pang Tao died in Jian Wushuang's hands. Pang Tao was killed almost instantly without a chance to crush his safety token and escape. What kind of power was that? Noticing the people's expressions around him, Jian Wushuang faintly smiled and went over to Zhuobing. Big sister, you haven't given away the position token, right? No, I haven't, replied Zhuobing. That's good. It's yours since you got it. I'll kill whoever that dares to snatch it. Jian Wushuang was obviously saying that to the genius disciples around him. Those genius disciples were greedy for the position token in Zhuobing's hand. After hearing Jian Wushuang's warning, all of them were hesitating if it was worth snatching. They were fearful of Jian Wushuang. Why is Jian Wushuang so strong? I heard that he was able to duel second-class divine demons at the early stages of the chaotic realm. Now that he has reached peak chaotic realm, he's definitely stronger than before. How come he is so strong? Even Pang Tao was killed with a single wave of his sword with no chance to crush his safety token. How terrifying is that? I also think that Pang Tao's combat powers are a bit too much for a peak chaotic realm to handle. Maybe Jian Wushuang was just lucky? Could it be that Pang Tao was careless? Yes, it's possible. Those genius disciples were whispering. Jian Wushuang's beheading of Pang Tao shook the world. The sword movement was so fast that only a handful of people could see it. It was inevitable that many thought it was by mere luck that he killed Pang Tao. Motivated by the opportunities that came along with a position token, none of those disciples wanted to give it up so easily. After a round of discussion, many people looked at Jian Wushuang with their cold and menacing eyes. They had to attempt. A dark light beam appeared behind Jian Wushuang without warning. The dark light beam did not only strangely appear out of nowhere but was also extremely fast with overwhelming power. That sneak attack was made by a reputable first-class divine demon. He was overjoyed seeing that the dark light beam reached less than 10 meters behind Jian Wushuang. It's done! That first-class divine demon let out a low laugh as the dark light beam penetrated Jian Wushuang's figure. However, there were no traces of blood after it went through the figure, and in the next moment, Jian Wushuang's figure slowly dissipated. No good! The first-class divine demon's expression who did that sneak attack on Jian Wushuang turned ugly. He immediately took out his safety token and got ready to crush it. A purple light flashed and disappeared quickly. No one knew when it appeared or where it came from. Immediately after the purple light disappeared, another head flew out. That first-class divine demon was also too late in crushing his safety token. Such a case was normal as having the safety token would only allow one to have a life-saving chance in the tomb, but it did not guarantee that one would not die. In the end, a few moments were needed to take out a safety token and crushed it. Oftentimes, crisis suddenly came so fast that one could not react in time and crush their safety token before being killed. In such cases, the safety token was left unused. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang's sword was fast approaching. The first-class divine demon that followed Pang Tao was also killed by Jian Wushuang, and both did not crush their safety token in time. A first-class divine demon was killed again with just a single movement of his sword. It dampened the spirit of those genius disciples around to snatch the position token. All of them appeared to be frightened by Jian Wushuang. If they thought Jian Wushuang was just lucky when he previously killed Pang Tao, everyone could now realize that it was not a mere coincidence with another first-class divine demon killed. Jian Wushuang had horrifying powers. Chapter 2434. 3 tokens, too powerful. He is too powerful. Even a first-class divine demon was instantly killed. Wouldn't I be seeking death if I go up now? Many genius disciples around were afraid. They were afraid of Jian Wushuang's power. If one had such strong powers, no one would dare to challenge him even if he had treasures that many wanted. Jian Wushuang was just that kind of a person. No one dared to snatch the position token in Zhuobing's hands with Jian Wushuang by her side. Of course, they were willing to give that up to a certain extent because it was only the first position token. There were a total of 6 position tokens, and the genius disciples around would have opportunities to compete for the other 5 tokens. There was no need to challenge that terrifying Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang noticed how the attitude of those people around him have changed. He knew that he had shown them enough to make them fearful of him and was pleased. "Big sister, let's go," said Jian Wushuang. The surrounding crowd immediately gave way to Jian Wushuang and the others. "Little brother." Zhuo Bing stared at Jian Wushuang incredulously. She even wondered if Jian Wushuang, who was standing in front of her, was really her little brother. She was worried sick when she knew that Pang Tao had targeted Jian Wushuang before, but who knew that Jian Wushuang was not bothered at all. Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong had weird expressions on their faces. Jian Wushuang smiled helplessly. "Everyone, I know you have a lot of questions, but we have to get out of here first." "Yes, yes." Zhuo Bing and the others agreed. Jian Wushuang and his group made their way out using the path that was opened up for them. However, someone was not going to let them leave so easily. In that hidden independent space. "I'm surprised by this young man. That Pang Tao guy who was killed by him had the power of peak divine demon but had no chance to crush the token in his hand. It seems that was not enough to put pressure on Jian Wushuang. In that case, the Crimson Stone Saint smiled in a weird demeanor and 2 white tokens appeared in his hand. Those 2 white tokens were instantly tossed out. Jian Wushuang, Zhuo Bing, and the others were about to leave the crowd as those genius disciples around had suppressed the greed in them. No one was going to do anything to stop them. At this moment, bang, bang, the ground underneath Jian Wushuang's feet suddenly cracked open and 2 bright white lights shot up. The 2 white lights appeared right next to Jian Wushuang, one on each side. Jian Wushuang frowned and subconsciously waved his hand, catching both white tokens. The sudden change of events caught Jian Wushuang by surprise. Zhuo Bing, the others next to him, and those genius disciples from various sects around were all stunned. The first token position which appeared before that everyone was fighting for had ended up in the hands of Zhuo Bing. No one dared to fight for that token because of Jian Wushuang. Suddenly, 2 more position tokens appeared at the same time and both fell directly into Jian Wushuang's hands. The 2 tokens plus the one with Zhuo Bing added up to a total of 3 tokens altogether. Jian Wushuang had 3 tokens. Those genius disciples from various sects were consumed by jealousy. Jian Wushuang looked at the 2 position tokens in his hand and frowned. The position tokens were supposed to appear in every corner of the inner area, but now 3 of them appeared at the same time in the area where I'm located. It might be a coincidence for the first one, but these two were sent directly to me. How could it be a coincidence? It looks like I was intentionally put in this situation. Jian Wushuang seemed to have figured it out. His gaze became gloomy all of a sudden. He knew that all of this was deliberately plotted by someone, and there could only be one person who could control when and where these tokens appear in the tomb. Crimson Stone Saint. That old guy, is he targeting me? Jian Wushuang murmured. Those people around who had given way for Jian Wushuang and his group to leave had once again encircled them. There were hundreds of genius disciples from various sects and all of them with their fiery eyes were staring at the 2 position tokens in Jian Wushuang's hands. One of the first-class divine demons said, "Jian Wushuang, you are indeed strong. We will let go of that position token with the Ice Queen, but I hope you would hand over those 2 position tokens to us." The first-class divine demon was quite polite, or perhaps he was just cautious and did not take immediate action to snatch it. He hoped that Jian Wushuang would take the initiative to hand the tokens over. "Yes, the first position token is fine, but these 2 must be given away. There are only 6 position tokens. You already have one. You can't be too greedy." Jian Wushuang, give it away. There were a few first-class divine demons around who acted as representatives and all of them tried to coerce Jian Wushuang into giving up his tokens. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. He knew that these genius disciples were horrified by his powers, hence they were willing to give up on a single token. However, to allow Jian Wushuang 3 position tokens which accounted for half of the 6 available seats, they were not going to let that happen. "Little brother." Zhuo Bing and the others also looked at Jian Wushuang. They were calm. Although Jian Wushuang had attained 2 more position tokens, it was not something good. Jian Wushuang glanced at Zhuo Bing, but he was actually deep in his thoughts. Big sister is very keen at getting a seat to be enlightened by Fengtian scroll, so the first position token must be hers. I also need a position token for myself. As for Ling Dan, Zhong Yi and Su Tong, though they had not expressed their intentions, they are also extremely eager for those position tokens. Now that I have 3 tokens, the last token should be assigned to one of them, which currently is just. After pondering for a moment, Jian Wushuang had made up his mind. He needed all 3 tokens. How could he give them up? Big sister, give me your token, said Jian Wushuang. Zhuobing did not hesitate and immediately took out her token. Jian Wushuang took it and said, "All of you, get out of the battlefield." Get out from the battlefield? Zhuobing's expression changed. Chapter 2435. Besieged. Little brother, are you thinking of? Zhuobing frowned and looked at Jian Wushuang. She had figured out what Jian Wushuang was about to do. Just leave it to me and don't worry. I know what I am doing. Jian Wushuang gave her a reassuring smile. Zhuobing contemplated and sighed. Okay, but you must be careful. If it doesn't work, hand over 1 or 2 of those tokens. I know. I have Pang Tao's safety token now. If there's danger, he'll just crush the safety token and leave, said Jian Wushuang. Zhuobing finally gave in. Well, go now. Zhuobing signaled the rest and walked towards the battlefield's edge with Ling Dan, Zhong Yi, and Su Tong. Let them go. The crowd around immediately gave way. Those genius disciples were after the position tokens and saw Zhuobing giving hers to Jian Wushuang. They have decided to only deal with Jian Wushuang since all the 3 position tokens were with him, hence they could not wait for Zhuobing and the others to leave. After Zhuobing and the rest walked out of the crowd, they stood at the battlefield's edge and watched instead of leaving the area. Junior sister, are we really just watching from here? Ling Dan sought confirmation from Zhuobing. We can only place our trust in little brother. Besides, you've seen his strength and power. We may not be able to help much, said Zhuobing. Miss Zhuobing is right. Junior brother Wushuang has been hiding his true potential from the beginning. No one knows how strong he is exactly. Judging from his confident look, the many genius disciples might not be able to harm him at all. We just have to look from afar for now. Besides, junior brother Wushuang has Pang Tao's safety token. He can just crush it if he senses danger, added Zhong. Zhuobing and the others had left the battlefield while Jian Wushuang remained encircled by those genius disciples from various sections. The 3 position tokens are in Jian Wushuang's hands. Those genius disciples present were greedily eyeing the 3 tokens. Jian Wushuang flipped his hands, and the 3 position tokens went into his interspatial ring. That provoked those genius disciples around with their expressions turning ugly. Jian Wushuang, we respect your ability and have agreed not to snatch the first token from you and your group. Don't push our limits. Although you are capable, push past our limits and we'll go after you. When that happens, it will be your dead end. Jian Wushuang, I advise you not to be so full of yourself. A few first-class divine demons started yelling. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly as he swept his gaze around. The 3 position tokens are indeed in my hands, but I can't hand over the tokens for nothing. If you really want them, come and grab it from me. So bold. Since you are so stubborn, you can't blame us. Let's kill him together. Kill him and all the 3 tokens will be up for grabs. Attack! About hundreds of genius disciples from various sects charged at the same time. Among them, there were nearly 10 first-class divine demons. They believed with their combined attacks, a true peak divine demons, even a top-tier one would not be spared. Let's do it. Zhuobing and the others were solemnly watching from outside the battlefield with some worries in their hearts. Boom, 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 boom. Suddenly, an overwhelming attack came down on Jian Wushuang. The attacks came from all directions and there were so many of them that Jian Wushuang could not avoid it all. Nonetheless, Jian Wushuang did not intend to avoid them at all. With the strength of his right arm, his blood mountain sword hummed softly and a majestic sword essence manifested itself. With him achieving the complete sword principle realm, Jian Wushuang's sword essence was more powerful than before. The sword essence greatly influenced his surroundings. Jian Wushuang himself seemed to have evolved into a black hole that was able to consume everything. In the middle of the black hole, a bunch of sword lights came forth. The sword lights were ferociously firing out like a rain of swords. Those atrocious attacks that were aimed at Jian Wushuang were instantly drowned by the rain of swords. The attacks were soon sent scattering in all directions. That was Xianluo Sword's principle, the Qi Coalesce. Did he just parry off all our attacks with a sword principle? His swordsmanship is powerful. Be careful, don't let him escape. The many genius disciples around began to locate where Jian Wushuang was, albeit just recovering from the shock. After the sword rain dissipated, Jian Wushuang's figure magically moved. Jian Wushuang's figure appeared in a void. Nearly 20 genius disciples in the void's vicinity immediately reacted. Rumble, a series of attacks were fired. Nonetheless, Jian Wushuang did use any sword principle to resist these attacks. He submitted himself to the assaults instead. The attacks shuttled past his body without touching any substance. That was obviously not Jian Wushuang's body. He's there. No, he's there. There's also one here. A series of exclamations sounded, and the many geniuses who besieged Jian Wushuang discovered that 5 Jian Wushuangs appeared on the battlefield at the same time. Adding in the one that they had just launched an attack on, there should be a total of 6 images. Those 6 Jian Wushuangs were exactly the same in appearance and demeanor. They could not tell which one was real. These are space-time shadows. Only those who had learned and apprehended space-time law could do this. Goodness, and he can create 6 space-time shadows at the same time. He must have a great understanding of space-time law. Perhaps he's very close to the first stage space-time apparition. Space-time apparitions can only trick the naked eyes, but not one's soul. With Soul Power 1, you can discern which of these 6 are merely shadows. Those genius disciples released their soul powers in the direction of Jian Wushuang. However, what their souls found, all 6 are shadows. How could that be? There, his real body is there. An exclamation sound came abruptly, and everyone looked around only to find that on a hill at the edge of the battlefield, a young man holding a sword was watching them with interest. That person was Jian Wushuang. While they were busy identifying which of these 6 shadows was Jian Wushuang, he had already broken free from their siege and went to the battlefield's edge. Chapter 2436. You've pissed me off, too? Too fast. Junior brother Wushuang's apprehension of space-time law has probably already been infinitely close to the first stage. None of these genius disciples could keep up with him. Zhong Yi and the others were shocked. They were worried that Jian Wushuang would not be able to face so many genius disciples single-handedly, but Jian Wushuang's speed had thrown them off by surprise. With such terrifying speeds and such high-level apprehension of the space-time law, no wonder Jian Wushuang was not afraid of these disciples' siege. Keep on attacking. Kill him. Although the 100 genius disciples saw Jian Wushuang's terrifying speed, they were not about to give up. Their attacks came firing like swarms of bees. Previously, Jian Wushuang could easily cope with their siege. It was an extravagant hope for those people to attack him when he had already broken through their siege. Not giving up yet? Alright, he'll play along. Jian Wushuang smirked, his figure evolved once again. Whiff, 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 whiff. 6 space-time shadows appeared at the same time and their speeds were fast. Where is he? Find him quick. The genius disciples roared and relied on their soul powers to again locate Jian Wushuang's real body. At the same time, Jian Wushuang's body appeared in another void some distance away from them. He was already halfway sitting down in that void with his brows jumping like he was having fun. Damn, he's too fast. We can't keep up with him. No, I can't catch up to him at all. He's just playing with us. What do we do now? Those genius disciples finally understood what was going on. Among them was a first-class divine demon from one of the big sections. He was a strong man with a solid back and tapered waistline. That man was holding a giant axe while keeping an eye on Jian Wushuang with raging anger. Despite his anger, that man kept his sense. He's too fast. We can't do anything to him at all. We can only kill him if he fights us head-on instead of avoiding us." The strong man snorted. He turned his gaze slowly towards Zhuobing and the others who were not far away. "The Ice Queen is his eldest sister. If we can capture her, we can force Jian Wushuang to face us." The strong man wore a cold and hard expression and had secretly made a decision in his heart. "Everyone, let's capture the Ice Queen first. As long as the Ice Queen is in our hands, we don't have to worry about Jian Wushuang not handing over the position tokens." The strong man yelled as he dashed towards the direction of Zhuobing and the rest. The many genius disciples around were startled when they heard the strong man bellowed, and all of them immediately reacted thereafter. "Yes, the Ice Queen is close with this brat. As long as we capture her, we can do as we wish." "Haha, we can't do anything to Jian Wushuang, but we can target the Ice Queen. Hurry up, don't let the Ice Queen escape." Around 100 genius disciples turned around and zoomed towards Zhuobing's direction. They knew they were unable to harm Jian Wushuang, who had a terrifying speed, but the Ice Queen was not as fast. "Damn it!" Zhuobing, Ling Dan, and the rest saw what was coming as their facial expressions drastically changed. "Shameless!" Zhuobing cursed. "Junior sister, run quickly!" Ling Dan repeatedly cried. Zhuobing turned around and left without hesitation. She did not want to fall into the hands of those mad genius disciples to be used as a bargaining chip against Jian Wushuang. However, while Zhuobing turned and fled, Jian Wushuang, who had been sitting in the void, took everything in with his cold gaze. His body instantly came sweeping down. In just a split second he passed those genius disciples and first appeared behind Zhuobing. He stood protectively over Zhuobing. "Ha! Jian Wushuang, so you have finally decided to fight?" The strong man laughed out loud. They intended for Jian Wushuang to fight them head-on instead of avoiding them with his shadows so that they could kill Jian Wushuang together. They had achieved their goal. "Little brother." Zhuobing's expression sank. She had never expected herself to become Jian Wushuang's burden. If she had known any better, she would have listened to Jian Wushuang and went off as far as she could, away from the battlefield. Jian Wushuang had to fight head-on with those genius disciples because of their siblings' relationship. Just when those genius disciples were delighted by Jian Wushuang's will to fight, Jian Wushuang raised his eyes and locked them on those disciples with a horrifying flash. "Congratulations to guys, because you have pissed me off." Jian Wushuang's cold voice echoed throughout the area. His face resembled Shura as he was ready to kill. He had not intended for a massacre. After all, there were 100 genius disciples from various sects in the Wuxia wilderness in front of him. Most of these sects were not powerful, but there were several big sections. If he had killed any of them, it could have resulted in him declaring war on those sections. Although they were all fighting for the position tokens, being subject to the fate of life and death, they tried not to make any unnecessary moves. Therefore, if it was not necessary, Jian Wushuang would not want to kill. When he faced the siege of 100 genius disciples, he had only relied on his speed to break through the circle and simply played a trick on them. He was hoping that they would just admit defeat and give up on fighting. Jian Wushuang thought that he was being kind and merciful. Who would have thought that those disciples took his kindness for granted and went directly for Zhuobing to threaten him? Zhuobing was his big sister. Although they had only met for the first time in Saint's Tomb, Zhuobing took care of him and even tried to stand up for him. She offered him her own safety token, which moved Jian Wushuang very much. That was the true affection of a family member. Jian Wushuang would not tolerate those unscrupulous genius disciples who wanted to harm his family members. That was the last straw. It had angered Jian Wushuang and awakened his desire to kill. It was ridiculous that those genius disciples were blinded by their desire for the position token that they could not feel Jian Wushuang's wrath. They would not be bothered even if they felt it. "Let's fire together!" The strong man shouted, and once again, the 100 genius disciples attacked. Chapter 2437. Massacre. There were 100 genius disciples, and among them were 10 first-class divine demons. With such a huge lineup, even a peak divine demons would admit defeat and flee. Due to that, those genius disciples were extremely confident in facing Jian Wushuang. Huh, so what if you're powerful? I don't believe alone you can face off 100 of us? The strong man had a wide grin. Jian Wushuang, who was standing in the void in front of him, transformed into several shadows. The strong man curled his lips. Do you still want to run away from the fight? I'll hunt down the Ice Queen if you run away. As soon as that strong man finished his sentence, Jian Wushuang's figure appeared in the crowd without a warning. The void filled with a sense of bone-chilling atmosphere that they even spotted snow falling. At the same time as the falling snow, a dreamy sword light lit up. The sword light completely integrated with the void's snowflakes. The first style of purple blood sword skill, falling snow. A sword light swept across and 13 heads instantly flew out at the same time. All 13 heads still had that crazed, ferocious look when they were being decapitated from their necks. What? The people around him were shocked. There was no way that 13 heads could be thrown out at the same time. Such a scene was rare. The sword light fell along with falling snowflakes and Jian Wushuang's figure disappeared once again. When he appeared again, Jian Wushuang was still in the crowd and in front of him stood more than a dozen genius disciples including a first-class divine demon. Jian Wushuang wielded his sword. It was just a simple front stab across with his sword and there was an instant rumbling. The void was filled with blood and the whole world seemed to have completely plunged into a shoe-ras hell with blood everywhere. Jian Wushuang, the sword in his hand, and even the sword technique that he used were completely turned into blood. That was the fourth style of purple blood sword technique, Blood Demon. The first-class divine demon was the first to react to Jian Wushuang's sword. Hurry up, let's act together and block his sword. The first-class divine demon was terrified. If he was alone, he would not have dared to parry off Jian Wushuang's sword, but it was different when there were more than a dozen of them together. Hearing his shouts, more than a dozen genius disciples around immediately took action. A series of brutal attacks superimposed on top of each other and bombarded Jian Wushuang's bloody sword. Boom! There was a loud noise when the two forces of attacks collided. The area was completely reduced to a sea of blood. In the center of the blood sea, a defense formed by more than a dozen genius disciples collapsed. The blood-red sword light crushed everything and penetrated into the group. Numerous smaller blood-colored sword lights came out from the larger sword light and formed a huge blood-colored sword net. The net had more than a dozen genius disciples within it. Damn it! The expressions of those genius disciples drastically changed. Swoosh! The sound of those small sword lights entering their body came repeatedly and more than a dozen genius disciples, except for the first-class divine demon who crushed the safety token and escaped at the nick of time, had their divine bodies cut into several pieces or even dozens of pieces by the sword net. Blood and flesh scattered everywhere. Those genius disciples were ruthlessly killed in a blink of an eye. Jian Wushuang's figure disappeared again. When he appeared again, he was in front of the strong man who shouted fiercely before. There was another first-class divine demon who stood beside that strong man. For Jian Wushuang, there was no difference between first-class divine demons and second-class divine demons. Jian Wushuang drew out his sword. In that second when his sword was swung across, ripples appeared in the void. Time seemed to be completely frozen. That was Jian Wushuang's self-invented space-time sword technique. The first style, cutting snow. That strong man had a feeling like never before. He knew that death was near. His eyes were filled with terror and without any hesitation he grabbed his safety token. Just when he was about to crush his safety token, boom! A huge blow of soul power penetrated into his consciousness and bombarded his soul. It was a soul attack secret technique, 3 golden divine light. Jian Wushuang's soul attack skill was not strong. After all, he had yet to recover his power to the level of a divine demon realm. His soul attack skill was just detrimental to ordinary second-class or third-class divine demons. Luckily, although that strong man was a first-class divine demon, his soul power was not strong and probably only at the level of a second-class divine demon. In addition, he was defenseless as he was not prepared for an attack on his soul. that made him miss the opportunity to crush his safety token. Swoosh! The blurry sword light swept across and cut that strong man's head off. Before breathing his last, the strong man was in a state of stupor. He's not only skillful with a sword but also good at launching soul attacks? The strong man died. The first-class divine demon who was beside him saw that the situation was no good, hence he crushed his safety token and fled. Jian Wushuang took away the strong man's interspatial ring before his body disappeared again. Bush, bush, bush. Jian Wushuang's figure repeatedly disappeared and reappeared among the crowd. He was too fast, making it almost impossible for those genius disciples to catch hold of him. Every time he appeared, he was accompanied by a terrifying sword light. The sword light was invincible. No one could resist it. Regardless of first-class or second-class divine demons, those who had a safety token instantly crushed it to save their own lives. Those without one would be dead in no time. Bush, bush, bush. His repeated appearances sent heads flying. Those headless bodies fell down like raindrops. In an instant, Jian Wushuang had disappeared and appeared about 7 times, back and forth, which was enough to scare the remaining genius disciples witless. Run! Run now! The genius disciples who were still alive screamed and frantically fled into the surrounding void at top speeds. Everyone was running for their lives. They did not stop until they were in the void, which was further away from the battlefield. After that, with horrified eyes, they turned and looked towards the battlefield ahead. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.